Hey friends! Glad you're here at Arcane Paradox. We've cooked up something special. What if Sirius escaped Azkaban at hairy age 5 and dog form detected 61 tracking runes on Godson? Liking and subscribing really helps us out. Okay, story time. Chapter 1, Padfoot. The North Sea didn't care about Sirius Black. That was, in a strange way, the most comforting thing about it. The waves hit him the same way they hit the rocks, without recognition, without judgment, without the particular soul-crushing weight of a Dementor gliding 3 feet overhead and breathing in every warm memory you'd ever managed to hold on to. The sea just hit him and pulled back and hit him again, and Sirius, in the body of a very large, very exhausted black dog, put one paw in front of the other and kept moving. He'd been in the water for 11 hours. He knew this because the sky had been the particular dark purple of 4 in the morning when he'd gone over the wall, if you could call a sheer cliff face dropping into freezing black water a wall, and now it was the kind of gray that came just before sunrise committed to itself. 11 hours. He'd done longer swims as a younger man, practicing the Animagus form with James in the Black Lake at Hogwarts while Remus watched from the bank with a warming charm and a look of profound exhaustion at both of them. James. He let himself think the name for exactly 3 seconds, then shoved it down somewhere deep where the cold water helped keep it still. There would be time for James later. There would be time for all of it, the grief, the guilt, the 4 years of Azkaban screaming, but not now. Now there was just the water and the horizon and the pale suggestion of coastline that had appeared about 40 minutes ago and had been growing incrementally, tauntingly larger ever since. Padfoot swam. The beach, when he finally dragged himself onto it, was not a beach so much as a strip of gray pebbles between the sea and a concrete seawall, and it was completely deserted, which was the only piece of luck Sirius had been granted in 4 years, and he was going to take it. He lay there for a while, chest heaving, the waves still reaching up to lick at his back paws as if the sea wasn't quite finished with him yet. His fur was matted flat against his body. He could count his own ribs through it. He'd been able to count his ribs for 3 years. The Dementors weren't interested in the physical realities of your body, whether you ate, whether you slept properly, whether the cold got into your joints. They were interested in something more specific, something less tangible, and Sirius had learned in his first year at Azkaban that the only way to survive their attention was to become something they couldn't properly read. The dog helped. The dog was simple in the way that magic is simple, it was what it was, without the complicated architecture of human guilt and human memory that the Dementors fed on. In the dog form he was just hunger and cold and the stubborn persistence of a living creature that hadn't decided to stop yet. He hadn't decided to stop. He thought about that while he lay on the pebble beach and waited for his legs to agree to function again. The thing that had gotten him over the wall, not gradually planned, not carefully orchestrated, but immediate, responding to something that had hit him during the worst of last night's Dementor storm like a fist through glass. He'd been deep in the dog when the vision came, which was strange because the dog didn't dream the way the man did, the dog's nightmares were simpler and less structured, but this had been clear enough to jolt him almost human again right there in his cell. Harry. Screaming. Not the screaming of a child having a nightmare or a tantrum. The specific, particular screaming of a child who had been screaming for long enough that they no longer expected anyone to come. Sirius didn't know if it was a vision or a projection or just his own guilt wearing a child's face. He didn't particularly care. He'd hit the bars of his cell with both hands and then he was the dog and then he was through the gap that a man could never have fit through and then he was in the water. 11 hours later, he was on a pebble beach in Scotland, and he needed to find his godson. He transformed back to human in the shadow of the seawall, which was not a comfortable experience. For years of limited transformation, short shifts in the cell when the Dementor's attention drifted, had left his body confused about the process, and he had to push through a disorienting few seconds where he was somehow both shapes at once before it resolved. He came out the other side shaking and nauseated and sitting on the wet pebbles in the ragged remains of his Azkaban robes, which were not meaningfully different from rags. He looked like what he was, a man 4 years out of civilization. He'd deal with that. He'd dealt with worse. The first Muggle he encountered an hour later, walking along the coastal road, transformed back to the dog because the dog attracted less alarm than a hollow-eyed man in rags, dropped half a ham sandwich when Padfoot appeared out of the morning mist, and Sirius ate it before the man had finished his startled exclamation of Christ Almighty. It was the best thing he'd tasted since 1981, and he didn't let himself examine that too closely. He moved south. He had no wand. He had no money. He had no identification, no change of clothes, no plan beyond the immediate geographical objective of reaching a street in Surrey called Privet Drive, a street he'd never visited because Dumbledore had been very specific about the protections and very vague about exactly why Sirius couldn't simply see his godson, and finding Harry. The how of the rest of it would come after. It took him 9 days to reach Surrey, moving mostly at night in dog form and resting during the day in whatever copse of trees or abandoned outbuilding presented itself. He ate what he could scavenge and accepted what people left out for the large, sad-looking stray that had apparently taken up residence near their bins. Twice he was nearly picked up by a well-meaning woman with a car and a concerned expression, and once a dog warden spent an uncomfortable 40 minutes trying to corner him in a car park before Sirius squeezed through a fence and kept walking. His mind was not entirely reliable during those 9 days. The Dementor withdrawal was real and it was ugly. There were hours, particularly late at night, when the weight of 4 years of forced memory feeding came crashing back in and he had to be the dog completely, purely, without any of the man's consciousness, until it passed. He lost time that way. He'd come back to himself once lying in a field with no memory of how he'd gotten there, the grass wet against his cheek, the stars overhead in configurations that suggested he'd lost about 6 hours. He kept moving. Little whinging announced itself as the Muggle suburbs announced themselves, which was to say it looked exactly like every other Muggle suburb, identical houses in terracotta and pebble dash arranged in loops and cul-de-sacs as though a very conservative child had been given a town planning kit for Christmas. Sirius moved through it in the early morning of the 9th day, before the residents were awake and the streets were just light and birdsong and the distant sound of someone's car failing to start. Privet Drive was a loop. Neat hedges. Gardens maintained with the particular intensity of people who cared about what their neighbors thought. The houses had names on little plaques by the doors: Dunedin, the Larches, Mon Repos, which Sirius found inexplicably depressing. Number 4 had petunias. He stopped at the end of the front path, 40 feet from the door, and that was when it hit him. Not a smell, or not only a smell, though that was part of it, the specific signature of a magical child's untrained, uncontrolled magical core, which smelled nothing like anything a Muggle would recognize but which a trained Animagus knows processed as something like ozone and old books and the particular sharp bright static of lightning before it strikes. That was Harry. He was in there, definitely in there, alive, and something in Sirius's chest that had been clenched for 4 years loosened exactly 1 notch. But underneath that, layered through it, woven into the magical signature like a second thread in a tapestry, Sirius's hackles went up. The fur along his spine rose all the way to his ears. The growl that came out of him was low and sustained and involuntary, because what his Animagus senses were reading in his godson's magical aura was wrong in a way that every animal instinct he possessed was responding to as threat. Runes. Not 1 or 2. Not a simple tracking charm laid on top of the magical signature the way you might tag a child with a locator spell for safety purposes. This was structured. He prowled the length of the front garden hedge, nose working, trying to count, and the counting was what stopped him cold in the middle of the Dursleys' perfect lawn. He couldn't count them quickly. There were too many. He shifted to human in a crouch, right there on the lawn, because the dog could sense them but the man could read them, and reading them required the part of his brain that had passed runes at any WT level, which felt like approximately someone else's life right now but was apparently still functional. He pressed both hands flat to the grass and let his eyes defocus the way Dumbledore had taught him in his 6th year, looking not at the physical world but at the magical one layered over it, and 61 runes. He counted twice. 61 runes burned into Harry's magical core, not his body, not layered on the house, into the core itself, into the source, the fundamental generating structure of Harry's magic. Monitoring runes, most of them, reading his magical output, his emotional state, the frequency and intensity of accidental magic. Tracking runes, a cluster of 7, maintaining constant positional awareness. And buried in the middle, the most complicated constructions. For runes he needed 3 passes to decode properly, reporting runes. Active. Currently transmitting. To 2 separate locations. Sirius sat back on his heels on the Dursleys' lawn and looked at the house for a long moment, and the fury that moved through him was so clean and so total that it felt almost like peace. Someone had been watching Harry. Not protecting him, watching him, reading him, receiving reports on his magical development and his emotional state and his precise geographical location, every hour of every day since 1981. Maybe since before that. Maybe since Harry was born. And someone else, a second recipient that Sirius couldn't immediately identify, had also been receiving those reports. He was still sitting there working through the implications when a light came on in an upstairs room at number 4. Not Harry's room. The master bedroom. Sirius moved around to the side of the house, staying low, and found what he was looking for on the east wall, a small window at ground level, a basement or a cupboard. The magical signature was strongest here. He pressed his palm to the brickwork and felt the rune structure pulsing faintly under his hand, active, transmitting, and underneath it Harry's own magic, enormous for a 5-year-old, genuinely enormous, the kind of magical core that should have had specialists involved, should have been carefully nurtured, cramped and quiet and trained down small by the simple force of existing somewhere that never permitted it to stretch. The cupboard under the stairs. Sirius stood up. He didn't kick the door in because he was still thinking, which was an achievement given the circumstances. Kicking the door in would activate every monitoring rune on the property. He could see them now, a different set layered into the house's structure, Dumbledore's actual protective wards, the ones that were supposed to trigger if anything threatened the residents. Kicking the door in would also alert the Dursleys, who would alert the neighbors, who would alert someone, and Sirius was still technically a prisoner of Azkaban with no wand and no legal standing and the Ministry of Magic's most wanted status. He needed to be smarter than his instincts. He pressed his forehead against the cold brick and breathed until the red receded enough to think properly. What were his priorities? Harry, first. Getting Harry out without triggering a response that would bring the Ministry down on them in the next 6 hours. And the runes, he couldn't remove them here, he didn't have a wand, and an incomplete removal would hurt Harry and also alert both recipients that something had changed. So the runes had to keep transmitting. At least long enough for him to get Harry clear. He needed to spoof the signal. He went back to the front garden and spent 20 minutes scratching a containment rune into the earth with a stick, using the method his runes professor had called anchor and echo, a static copy of the current magical output, frozen at this moment, that would continue transmitting the same data to both recipients for as long as the rune held. Maybe 6 hours. Maybe 8 if Harry's actual magical fluctuation was low enough that the change wasn't obvious. It was field-expedient runic magic done with a stick in someone's front garden by a man who hadn't slept properly in 4 years. It was not his finest work. But it was enough. He went back around to the cupboard. The latch was a simple Muggle padlock, which meant it was no obstacle at all to a man who had grown up in a household where the locks were all charmed and Muggle mechanisms were considered quaint. He manipulated the mechanism the way James had taught him, James, who'd grown up half in the Muggle world and had a gift for the intersection, with a careful application of the right kind of pressure in the right sequence, and the lock opened. He eased the cupboard door back. Harry was asleep on a cot that was too small for him even at 5 years old, curled on his side with his knees pulled up. He was wearing clothes that were 3 sizes too big and had presumably belonged to someone larger. He was so thin it made Sirius's throat close. One hand was fisted in the thin blanket. His hair was a catastrophe, James's hair, the exact same principled refusal to lie flat, and there was a faint silvery scar on his forehead that caught the light from the door. He had James's face. He had Lily's eyes, shut now, the lashes dark against his cheek. Sirius crouched in the doorway for a moment and let himself feel it, all of it, the 4 years and the trial that wasn't and the cell and the cold and what it had cost to keep getting up every morning when every Dementor in Azkaban was pushing stop at him, let it move through him like a wave and then he exhaled and let most of it go. "Hey," he said softly. "Hey, pup. Wake up." Harry's eyes opened immediately, the way children sleep who've learned that sounds at night mean something is wrong. He was awake all at once, not groggy, body already tense. His eyes were very green in the dim light and they focused on Sirius with an expression of absolute unreadable wariness. "Who are you?" Harry said. His voice was quiet, which meant he was used to being quiet at night. "My name is Sirius," Sirius said. "I'm your godfather. You don't know what that means yet, but it means I'm the person who was supposed to be looking after you, and I've been, unavoidably detained, but I'm here now." Harry looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at the door of the cupboard, then back at Sirius. "You opened the lock," he said. "I did. Uncle Vernon locks it from the outside." "I know," Sirius said, and something in his voice must have been informative because Harry's wariness shifted towards something more like cautious interest. "Can you do that with all locks?" Harry asked. "Most of them." Harry sat up, clutching the blanket. He was studying Sirius with the focused attention of a child who has learned to read adults quickly for survival purposes, and the fact that Sirius could recognize that was doing nothing good for his blood pressure. "You said godfather," Harry said. "Like in a story?" "Like in a story," Sirius agreed. "Your dad was my best friend. I knew your mum too. I've known about you since before you were born and I'm sorry it took me this long to get here. I have, there were reasons, complicated ones, and someday I'll explain them all. But right now I need you to trust me enough to come with me. Can you do that?" Harry considered this with a seriousness that sat strangely on his small face. "Where are we going?" "Away from here first. The where comes after." "Will I have to come back?" The directness of the question landed like a stone in still water. Sirius met Harry's eyes, Lily's eyes, James's son, the child he'd held in the hospital while James cried openly and Lily laughed at James for crying, and said, with complete certainty, no. Harry got up. He did it immediately, without further deliberation, which told Sirius everything about how much the word no meant to a 5-year-old who had apparently been asking the question in one form or another for a while. He collected nothing because there was nothing to collect, no toys, no books, no personal items of any kind visible in the cupboard. He put his feet in a pair of shoes that were also too big, worn without socks, and looked at Sirius with an expression that said "I'm ready." Sirius pulled off his outer robe, it was ragged but it was large, and wrapped it around Harry's shoulders. It came down past his knees and puddled on the floor and Harry looked down at it and then up at Sirius. "It's cold outside," Sirius said. "Okay," said Harry. They went out the front door, which Sirius left on the latch because he had no interest in leaving the Dursleys any structural inconveniences, only relational ones, which he intended to leave in abundance at some future date when he had a wand and standing in considerably more capacity for sustained rage. He checked the anchor rune in the garden, adjusted 2 points in the construction where he'd been imprecise, and straightened up. Harry was standing on the path watching him with those focused green eyes. "What's that?" he asked, looking at the rune scratched in the earth. "A rune. You know what runes are?" "No. They're a kind of writing," Sirius said, "that means things instead of just saying them. That one," he pointed to the scratch marks, "is telling a lie for us so we can walk away without anyone knowing yet." Harry looked at the rune. Then he looked at Sirius. "We're doing a runner," he said, with the tone of someone identifying a familiar concept. "We are absolutely doing a runner," Sirius confirmed. "Come on." They walked down Privet Drive in the early morning quiet, a very large, very gaunt man in tattered robes and a very small boy swimming in an oversized robe 3 times his size, and the neighborhood slept around them and did not stir. At the end of the road, once they'd turned the corner and the neat hedgerows of Privet Drive were out of sight behind them, Harry looked up. "You said you knew my mum and dad," he said. I did. What were they like? Sirius looked down at his godson, 5 years old, too thin, too quiet, and asking the only question that had ever really mattered, and felt something in him shift back towards something that might eventually become functional. Your dad, he said, once turned every toilet in Hogwarts school into a jazz instrument at 3 in the morning because he lost a bet. Your mum turned them all back, but she left one going because she thought it was funny. That's what they were like. Harry was quiet for a moment, processing this. Then, what's Hogwarts? The school you'll go to when you're 11. The magical one. Another pause. I'm magical, Harry said, not a question. You're very magical, Sirius said. More than you know. Much more than you know. He hesitated. Harry, I need to ask you something and I need you to think about it. Have you ever felt, when you do things by accident, things that shouldn't be possible, do you feel anything after? Like a kind of buzz, or a tingling, or like something is watching? Harry's face went very still in the way that children's faces go still when they're deciding how much of the truth is safe. Sometimes, he said carefully. When I did something and the teacher got scared. I felt, I don't know. Like I'd broken something. Not broke, Sirius said. Not at all. What you felt was runes, Harry. Someone put them in you, in your magic, so they could feel what you feel. Every time your magic does something, they know. He watched Harry's face as he processed that. I'm going to figure out who did it and why, and I'm going to take them out. But that's going to take time. Someone can put things in magic. Harry said. He'd stopped walking. He was looking down at his own hands. Only someone very skilled, Sirius said. And it would have been done when you were very small, before you'd have known. Before you could have said anything about it. He crouched down so he was eye level with Harry. I'm going to undo it. I promise you. But first I need to get us somewhere safe, and for that I'm going to need help from someone who's better at this than I am right now, because I've been, in a bad place, for a while, and I'm not entirely at my best. Does that make sense? Harry looked at him steadily. You look like you haven't eaten enough, he said. I haven't. Me neither, said Harry, with a kind of flat pragmatism that broke Sirius's heart and strengthened his spine in equal measure. Right, Sirius said. He stood up. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to change shape, Harry repeated. I'm an Animagus. I can turn into a dog. A big black one. You're going to hold on to me and I'm going to find us something to eat and somewhere to sleep that isn't a cupboard, and we're going to start from there. Harry looked at him with those steady lily-green eyes. You can actually turn into a dog, he said. Watch, said Sirius, and shifted. The transformation was smoother than it had been on the pebble beach, his body was remembering itself, the pathways of the change clearing like roads after a snow melt. Padfoot sat on the pavement and looked up at his godson, who was staring at him with an expression of pure, unadulterated wonder, the first unconditionally delighted expression Sirius had seen on his face since they'd met, 40 minutes ago. You're enormous, Harry said. Padfoot huffed in what was meant to be dignified disagreement. Harry reached out and grabbed a fistful of black fur at Sirius's shoulder, holding on the way a child holds a railing, not clinging, just maintaining connection, oriented by something solid. He didn't say anything else. He just walked, hand in the fur, and Sirius moved beside him through the quiet streets of Little Whinging as the morning tipped from grey to pale gold and the first bird started in the hedgerows. They were 2 blocks away when Harry said, Sirius. Padfoot looked at him. The lock on the cupboard, Harry said. I tried for a really long time to figure out how to do that. Sirius kept walking. He didn't trust himself to respond, and the dog couldn't speak anyway, and both of these things were probably lucky because what was moving through him right now was something that had no business being on a residential street in Little Whinging at 6 in the morning. He walked Harry out of Surrey, one deliberate paw at a time. They found a park a mile and a half from Privet Drive where a morning market was setting up, vendors pulling tarps off stalls, and where a large black dog of melancholy expression could press his nose along the edge of a bakery stall until a woman with a kind face pressed a bread roll into the hands of the small boy attached to the dog. Harry ate half the roll and then very solemnly offered the other half to Padfoot, who ate it without argument, and then Harry tucked himself into a hollow in the parkland hedgerow with Padfoot's bulk curled around him as a windbreak and the oversized robe as a blanket, and was asleep in 4 minutes flat. Sirius stayed awake. He was very good at staying awake. For years of dementor-managed insomnia had given him a relationship with sleeplessness that was less coping mechanism and more old enemy. He lay with his godson's small, warm weight against his side and let his mind work through what he knew. 61 runes. Active. Transmitting to 2 separate locations. The first location he'd parsed quickly, the construction style, the runic grammar, the particular layering method was Hogwarts school design, early 20th century. Dumbledore. He'd been right on the edge of furious about it, still was, but the reading was at least coherent with a man who would make a calculated, paternalistic decision about a child's autonomy for what he believed were good reasons. Sirius didn't agree with it. He was going to have very specific words about it. But he understood the logic. The second location was different. The second set of receiving runes was older. The grammar was rougher, like someone had learned the construction method from a book rather than a teacher, and adapted it, cut corners, substituted glyphs where the originals were too complex. It was newer work, placed later than the Hogwarts-style runes, layered on top of an existing construction. And it was reading different things, not the monitoring spread that Dumbledore's set was tracking, but specifically, precisely, tracking only the magical core output. The raw power data. How strong Harry was. How his power was growing. Someone had added a second receiver after the first set was already in place. Had essentially piggybacked on Dumbledore's rune structure and added their own monitoring thread, reading Harry's power levels in real time. The question of who had the skill and the access to do that while staying invisible to Dumbledore was the question that kept Sirius's mind running in circles while the park filled with morning shoppers and Harry slept against his flank with the absoluteness of a child who had finally found somewhere he felt safe enough to fully let go. Harry's magic pulsed gently as he slept. Even unconscious, even untrained, it was big, the kind of big that justified every Death Eater prophecy and every Voldemort obsession and every sacrifice James and Lily had made to keep it safe. It pressed against the rune structure, constraining it like water against the walls of a too small vessel, constant, patient, inevitable. Sirius pressed his nose to the top of Harry's head. He was going to need Remus. He didn't want to involve Remus, not yet. Not until he knew more, because involving Remus meant an owl, which meant a traceable owl, which meant a potential thread back to their location. But the runic analysis was beyond him in his current state. Remus was the reader, Remus was always the one who could look at a text and find the structure underneath the structure. If anyone could identify the second recipient from the rune grammar alone, it was Remus. Sirius thought about the last time he'd seen Remus. October 1981. James and Lily 3 days dead. Himself in a ministry-holding cell, still refusing to believe that Peter Moore Action's request aborted. Right, the next chapter now. Chapter 2, 61. The village of Alnwick, Northumberland, had a castle that tourists photographed and a market square that smelled of fish on Fridays and a particular pub on the east side of the high street that had been serving questionable food to questionable people since 1743 without asking too many questions about either. Sirius found it on the second day because Padfoot's nose led him to the back kitchen, where the cook left scraps out with the resigned generosity of a man who had lost the argument with himself about strays some years ago. By the third day the cook was leaving them out deliberately. By the fourth day Harry was sitting on an upturned crate behind the kitchen door eating a bowl of soup that the cook had definitely not charged for, explaining to the man very seriously that yes, the dog was his, and yes, he was fine, and yes, his father was just inside getting them a room. His father. Sirius, returning from exactly that errand, a room paid for in Muggle cash that he'd acquired through a sequence of transactions he preferred not to examine too closely, stopped in the alley doorway and felt the word land somewhere in his chest like a weight he hadn't known he'd been bracing for. Harry didn't look up. He was engaged in a detailed negotiation with the cook about whether the dog was allowed inside, and the cook was losing. The dog, Sirius said, arriving in time to rescue the cook from an argument he was clearly never going to win, sleeps outside. Harry looked at him. He's cold. He has fur. He's still cold. The cook looked between them with the expression of a man watching a tennis match where he wasn't entirely sure which player was the adult. I'll put an extra blanket in the room, he said diplomatically, and retreated to his kitchen. Their room was on the top floor, 2 narrow beds, a window that looked at a chimney stack, and walls that had been painted the color of old cream some decades ago and had since developed their own personality. Harry stood in the middle of it and turned in a slow circle, taking it in. "This is our room," he said. "For now. Both of us. Both of us." Harry sat down on the nearer bed and pressed both hands flat on the mattress, testing it, the way you test something you didn't entirely trust to be real. He looked up. "For how long?" "A few days. Until I've sorted some things." Sirius sat on the other bed and faced him. "Harry, I need to send a letter. To someone I trust. It means telling them where we are, and I need to decide whether that's the right move yet, and I'm asking you because I don't think decisions about your life should be made around you without you." Harry considered this for a moment. "Is the person safe?" "Yes." "Will they tell anyone we're here?" "Not if I ask him not to." "Him," Harry noted. "His name is Remus. Remus Lupin. He was friends with your dad, and with me, and I think he's been having a hard 4 years too. Differently hard. But hard." Harry thought about this with the focused deliberation he brought to everything. "Send the letter," he said. "He's sad." "I think so." "Then he should know we're here," Harry said simply, with the unshakable logic of a 5-year-old, and lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling. Sirius looked at his godson for a moment, then laughed, actually laughed, the first real one, rough with disuse but genuine all the way through. Harry turned his head to look at him with an expression of curious assessment. "Sorry," Sirius said. You remind me of someone." "My dad?" "Both of them, actually. At the same time. Which should be impossible but isn't." Harry turned back to the ceiling. "Tell me something about them," he said, in the carefully neutral voice of someone who wanted something very much and had learned not to show how much. "Tonight," Sirius said. "Let me send the letter first, and then tonight I'll tell you everything I know, and you can ask anything you want." The pub had a notice board in the front room where people left messages, and among them was a wizarding post relay point, the discreet kind, a scratched rune set into the corner of the board that redirected owls from the public owlery in Newcastle. Sirius found it while ostensibly examining the board for local services, scratched his message into a slip of paper using the pen on the string, and pushed it through. The message was 4 words and a location, Alnwick. "I found him." He didn't need to sign it. There was exactly one person in the world for whom that message would be both intelligible and devastating in equal measure. He went back upstairs. Harry was not, as he'd half expected, asleep. He was sitting cross-legged in the middle of his bed, hands resting on his knees, eyes closed, with an expression of absolute concentration. His magic was moving in a way Sirius could feel from the door, not the gentle sleeping pulse of this morning, but deliberate, active, a careful reaching outward. "What are you doing?" Sirius said. Harry opened his eyes. "Trying to feel it," he said. "What you said." "The runes. You said they're in my magic, so I'm trying to feel them." Sirius crossed the room slowly and sat on the edge of his bed, facing Harry. "Can you?" "There's something," Harry said slowly. "It's like, you know when you have something stuck in your tooth and you can't stop tonguing at it even though it bothers you?" He paused, clearly aware this was an odd description. It's like that, but I don't know where. In my chest, maybe. In my hands. I don't know where magic lives. It lives everywhere, Sirius said. It's in your blood and your core and your mind, and the runes are threaded through all of that. Don't reach for them directly yet, they'll pull at you back, and that's not something you're ready to manage alone. Does it hurt? To take them out? Sirius was quiet for a moment, choosing honesty over comfort because Harry, he was already understanding, would know the difference and would resent the latter. Probably a little, he said. Runic removal is more uncomfortable than painful, mostly. But I won't do it without telling you exactly what's going to happen first, and I won't do it at all until I've found someone who can do it properly. My runic knowledge it needs refreshing. I've been out of practice. Harry accepted this with a nod. Okay. Okay, Sirius agreed. He paused. I need to ask you some things about Privet Drive. About the Dursleys. Harry's face went carefully neutral in a way that was its own answer. You don't have to, Sirius said. No, Harry looked at his hands. What do you want to know? How long have you been sleeping in the cupboard? Harry's brow furrowed. Always, he said, with the complete simplicity of someone describing a fact of nature. It's my room. They said. When did they lock it? When I did something, Harry said. Magic things. By accident. Uncle Vernon didn't like it. He paused. I didn't know what it was. The magic. I thought I was broken. You are not broken, Sirius said, and his voice came out flat and hard because he couldn't quite manage gentle around the edges of that particular sentence. You are the opposite of broken. Everything that your magic did was your magic trying to be itself, and the fact that they punished you for it he stopped. Breathed. Is something I'm going to deal with. You keep saying that. Because I keep meaning it. Harry looked at him, Lily's eyes, James's bone structure, but already something that was purely himself, some quality of assessment that belonged to nobody else. You're angry, he said, not accusatory. Observational. Yes. About the cupboard or the runes? Both, Sirius said. More the runes, right now, because the cupboard I can understand in the logic of people who are small and frightened of things they can't explain. The runes required someone who understood exactly what they were doing. The runes required intent. Harry thought about this. Whoever did the runes, he said, they've been watching me my whole life. Since before you can remember. Yes. What were they watching for? The intelligence in the question hit Sirius like a physical thing. He was 5. He was 5 years old and underfed and had been sleeping in a cupboard for as long as he could remember, and he was asking what were they watching for with the calm precision of someone who already understood that he was a resource to someone, not a person. Your power, Sirius said. Mostly. How strong you are. How you're growing. And the second set? Harry said. Sirius stared at him. I didn't tell you there was a second set. You said 2 separate locations, Harry said. When you explained it outside. You said the runes were reporting to 2 places. He'd been listening. Every word, all the way back on Privet Drive at 6 in the morning, he'd been listening and filing it away. That's right, Sirius said. I don't know yet who the second set is sending to. That's one of the things Remus is going to help me work out. Is the second one bad? I think so, Sirius said. The first one, I think I know who it is, and I think they thought they were doing something protective, even if it wasn't their choice to make. The second one hid from the first. Parasite it. That's not protective. That's something else. Harry was quiet for a moment. Then, you said you'd tell me about my parents tonight. I did. It's tonight. Sirius looked at the window. The sky over the chimney stack had gone dark while they talked, the gray sliding all the way to black with the particular English speed of autumn. The light in the room was the amber of a single lamp in the corner. Harry was looking at him from the middle of his bed with an expression he hadn't seen before, not the wariness of the cupboard, not the careful assessment of the last 2 days. Something more open. More nakedly hoping. Sirius sat back against the headboard of his bed and said, "Okay. What do you want to know first?" "Everything," Harry said. So Sirius told him. He told him about James, the specific, operational reality of James Potter, which was so much larger and stranger than any legend Harry might eventually inherit. James, who was terrible at potions and exceptional at transfiguration, and who had decided at age 11 that rules were suggestions specifically to annoy him. James, who had been an arrogant disaster at 15 and a genuinely extraordinary human being at 20, and who had spent the years in between becoming the latter, which was never a comfortable process and which Lily Evans had accelerated through the application of consistent, unsparing honesty. He told Harry about Lily, the quality of her intelligence, which was different from James's in that James's intelligence was creative and instinctive and Lily's was precise and structural, and they balanced each other in ways that made both of them better. The specific character of her temper, which was slow to arrive and formidable on arrival. The way she'd looked at Harry the first time Sirius had visited after he was born, like she couldn't quite believe the math of it, that these two people had made this. He told Harry about the Marauders, the 4 of them at school, the particular chemistry of a friendship that had its roots in a shared willingness to cause trouble and grew into something sturdier and stranger. He told Harry about Moony and Wormtail and Prongs, because Harry deserved to know the names, deserved to know that he'd been born into a legacy of people who had loved each other genuinely and imperfectly and with enormous volume. He did not tell Harry about Peter. Not yet. Not until he knew more. He told Harry about the last time he'd seen his parents, 2 weeks before Halloween, James and Lily under Fidelius, Sirius pretending to be their secret keeper while the actual secret keeper was, he stopped. Glossed over it. Said, "There were things happening that I got wrong, and people got hurt, and I'm still working out how to fix it." Harry was 5. Sirius was 31 years old and just barely working through the architecture of it himself. It could wait. Harry listened through all of it without interrupting, which was either impressive self-control for a 5-year-old or evidence that he'd had 4 years of training in not interrupting people who were talking. Sirius suspected the latter, and it put the anger right back in his chest alongside everything else. When he finished, Harry said, "The jazz toilet thing." "Yes." "Was the music good?" Sirius blinked. Then laughed. "Actually, yes. Your dad had excellent taste in music for someone who'd been raised in an entirely magical household and shouldn't have had any exposure to jazz. I never asked him how that happened." "Do you like music?" Harry said. "I like everything loud," Sirius said. "Your dad and I used to sneak a Muggle radio into the dormitory. Remus pretended to hate it. Peter could actually carry a tune, weirdly enough." He stopped. Carried on. "Remus will be here soon. A day, maybe 2. What's he like?" Harry said. He'd been slowly, incrementally sliding down the bed during the storytelling, and was now lying on his side with his cheek on the pillow, fighting the losing battle of a child who doesn't want to admit they're tired. "Tired," Sirius said honestly. "Careful. He reads everything and he worries about the things he's read. He's the cleverest person I've ever met, which sounds like a compliment and is also an accurate description of a very specific kind of problem." He paused. "He'll love you. Not the famous you. You. He'll find that distinction extremely important." Harry said. His eyes were closing. "Sleep," Sirius said. "Still have questions," Harry said, without opening his eyes. "Still going to be questions tomorrow." A pause. Then Harry's breathing shifted into the particular depth of unconsciousness, and Sirius sat in the amber light of the room with his hands on his knees and his godson asleep across from him and thought about 61 runes and what to do about them. He needed parchment. He needed a quill, or a reasonable substitute. He drew the rune structures from memory on the back of a pub receipt using the cook's pen, working slowly and carefully, because the accuracy of the reconstruction mattered more than the speed. He'd been a good rune student, not Remus good, not the obsessive fluency that Remus brought to anything he studied, but solid. Methodical. Good enough to read what he'd felt in Harry's core. By the time he'd finished the reconstruction it was past midnight and he had 6 pages of pub receipts covered in runic notation and the beginnings of a headache. The first set, Dumbledore's, was exactly what he'd initially read. Monitoring, tracking, reporting. The construction was elegant, the grammar was classical, the layering method was a technique Sirius recognized from the advanced word-setting module in 6th year charms. It had been placed with care and considerable skill. It was also a profound overreach that Sirius intended to call Dumbledore directly on, using short words and, if he could arrange it, volume. The second set was what kept him. He stared at his reconstruction and turned it over and looked at it from different angles the way he'd learned to look at problems that didn't immediately resolve themselves, and the thing that kept catching him was the grammar. Runic grammar was like handwriting, individual, developed through years of practice, as identifying as a signature once you knew what to look for. And this grammar was familiar in a way he couldn't quite locate. Like hearing a voice in the next room and knowing you know it but being unable to place it from the sound alone. Someone had been reading Harry's power levels. Specifically and exclusively the power data. Not his health, not his location in any meaningful granular sense, not his emotional state. Just, how strong is he, and is he getting stronger? Sirius folded the pub receipts carefully and put them in his inner pocket. He lay down on his bed without undressing and stared at the ceiling and felt the question turning in him like a key in a lock that hadn't found the right mechanism yet. He was almost asleep when it arrived. Not the identification, not that yet. But the shape of what it implied. You'd want to know how strong someone was getting for one of 2 reasons. Because you were afraid of what they'd become, or because you were waiting for them to become strong enough for something. And Lord Voldemort, broken, scattered, not dead, had known, from the moment the curse rebounded, that the boy who'd broken him was alive. Sirius was on his feet before he'd finished the thought, moving across the room to Harry's bed, standing over him, watching the quiet even breathing. Harry's magical signature pulsed under the rune structure, slow and enormous and perfectly content in sleep. If the second set of runes was Voldemort, if someone loyal to Voldemort had somehow accessed the initial structure and added a secondary receiver, had been tracking Harry's development, his growing power, waiting for the moment when the boy who lived was strong enough to be worth moving against, he pressed his hand to the wall above Harry's bed and felt the cold plaster under his palm and made himself breathe. He needed Remus. He needed a wand. He needed a plan that extended past get Harry out of the cupboard, which had been an excellent first priority but was no longer sufficient. Harry's eyes opened. He looked up at Sirius without alarm, just awake, just present, adjusting. "Bad thought," he said. "Good guess." "Your footsteps changed," Harry said. "When you're thinking normally they're slow. When you thought of the bad thing they got faster and then they stopped." Sirius looked at his godson, who had apparently been cataloging his gait patterns in his sleep. "Harry," he said. "Did anyone ever tell you that you're unsettling for a 5-year-old?" "No," Harry said. "They mostly told me to be quiet." "Right," Sirius said. "Well, for the record, the unsettling part is a compliment." Harry considered this. "Are we safe?" "For tonight," Sirius said. "Yes. The anchor rune will hold through tomorrow at least, and no one can get here by morning even if they're looking, which they may not be yet." "But not for long," Harry said. "Not panicked. Just assessing." "No. Not for long." Sirius sat on the edge of Harry's bed. "Which is why I need Remus, and why we need to work very fast, and why I need you to tell me something. The rune structure I was describing, the feeling of something caught in your tooth. When does it feel different? When does it feel less caught, or more?" Harry's brow furrowed. He was quiet for a moment, feeling inward. More caught when I'm scared, he said slowly. Or when I'm angry. Less caught when, I don't know. When I'm happy, maybe. It kind of quiets. Because when you're frightened or angry your magic spikes, Sirius said. The runes key off the spikes. The more active your magic, the harder they're broadcasting. So if I'm calm, Harry said, they're quieter. Exactly. Is that why I should be calm? That's one reason. The other reason is that I don't want you to be frightened. He paused. I know that's not an instruction you can follow on command. I'm not asking you to. I wanted you to know it matters. To me. Not as a strategy. Harry looked at him for a long moment. Then he lay back down and pulled the blanket up and said, Tell me another story. About my dad. Which kind? A stupid one. Something he did that was really stupid. Sirius felt the corner of his mouth pull up. There was a time in third year, he said, settling back, when James convinced himself he could transfigure a live badger into a teapot for a bet, which went wrong in about 11 different ways that I'm still not entirely sure how to describe. Harry fell asleep about 2 minutes into the story. Sirius kept going in a low voice for a few minutes anyway, because the talking helped, and because he still had stories left, and because James's son deserved to hear his father's voice through whatever incomplete version of it was available, and Sirius was what was available. Remus arrived on the morning of the second day. Sirius heard him first, the particular footstep pattern on the pub stairs that hadn't changed in 10 years, the same careful weight distribution, the same habitual avoidance of the third step from the top. He was at the door when the knock came, and he opened it before Remus finished raising his hand a second time. They looked at each other. Remus Lupin at 31 looked like someone had taken a man of 45 and given him the face of someone younger, the combination producing something that was neither. He was thin in the way that suggested chronicity rather than recent circumstance, and there were gray threads through his brown hair that hadn't been there at 21, and his eyes had the particular quality of someone who had been being careful for a very long time. He was wearing Muggle clothes, sensible, anonymous, chosen for invisibility, and he had a battered bag over one shoulder and a wand in his hand because of course he had a wand in his hand. Remus had never been able to hear the word caution without automatically tripling down on it. He put the wand away. He looked at Sirius. He looked at Sirius for a long time, and Sirius stood there and let himself be looked at, because Remus was reading him the way Remus read everything, for the structure underneath the surface, and Sirius didn't have anything to hide. You look terrible, Remus said. I'm aware. For years of Azkaban terrible, Remus said, and his voice had something in it that wasn't accusation but was in the same neighborhood. Remus, not now, Remus said, with a steadiness that was clearly costing him something. Later. Where is he? Sirius stepped back from the door. Harry was sitting on his bed, cross-legged, watching the door with the focused attention he brought to things he considered important. His green eyes went from Sirius to Remus and back again, assessing. Remus walked into the room and stopped. He was doing the same thing Sirius had done in the cupboard doorway, the adjustment, the emotional calibration required to look at James and Lily's son for the first time. But Remus did it quietly, without anything visible crossing his face except a brief tightening around his eyes, before he sat down in the room's single chair and said, at a reasonable, normal human volume, "Hello, Harry." "Hello," Harry said. "You're smaller than I expected," Remus said. "You're older than I expected," Harry said. A fractional pause. "Fair enough," Remus said. "Sirius said you're the cleverest person he knows," Harry said. Remus glanced at Sirius. "He's been generous with the superlatives." "He also said it was a specific kind of problem," Harry said. "That sounds more accurate," Remus said. He settled back in the chair, and the careful thing in him seemed to ease one notch, the particular relaxation of someone who's been bracing for a difficult encounter and has found it less difficult than expected. "He wrote that you found something. In your magic." "He found it," Harry said. "With his nose." "Yes, yes." Remus looked at Sirius. "Show me." Sirius handed over the pub receipts. Remus took them, looked at the first one, looked at Sirius over it briefly with an expression that communicated volumes about the choice of medium, and then began to read. He read the way Remus always read, completely. Not scanning, not summarizing, actually reading, his eyes moving with the specific rhythm of someone absorbing and cross-referencing simultaneously. He went through all 6 receipts once, then went back to the last 2 and went through them again. His face was doing nothing, which meant his face was doing a great deal. "The first set," he said eventually. "Dumbledore," Sirius said. "Yes," Remus said, with a flatness that contained about 15 other words he was choosing not to say. "I recognize the construction." Yes. We'll come back to that." His finger traced the notation on the 4th receipt. "This one. That's the second set. I can see that." A pause. "The grammar is individual. Someone trained in classical runic construction but self-correcting for gaps in formal education. The substitutions here," his finger moved, "and here, they're intelligent substitutions, someone who understood why the original glyphs were used and made reasonable replacements. But the gaps are consistent. This person never had formal instruction in Third Age grammar." "Self-taught," Sirius said. "I got that far." "Self-taught from a specific text," Remus said. "These substitution patterns are consistent with the Liber Runicus, the 1823 Gareth translation, specifically, which has 3 known errors in the Third Age section that every trained runologist can spot and which anyone learning from that text would reproduce without knowing." He looked up. "This person learned runic construction primarily or exclusively from a book published in 1823 that contained 3 errors they'd have no way to identify." Sirius stared at him. "You can tell all of that from the substitutions?" "I've been doing a lot of reading," Remus said, in the tone of someone who had been doing a lot of reading because there was nothing else to do. "The question is who had access to Harry's existing rune structure to add a secondary receiver. This had to be placed within the existing framework. They didn't create it from scratch, they parasite Albus's initial construction, which means they needed either proximity to Harry or access to his core while the initial runes were being placed." The room was quiet for a moment. Harry, who had been listening to all of this with his hands in his lap and his eyes going between them, said, "The person who placed the first set. Could they have placed the second one without knowing?" Remus looked at him. "That's a very specific question," he said. "I'm wondering if someone used the first person," Harry said. "Used them without knowing. Put the second set in while the first person was working." Another silence. "This one had a different quality." "How old are you?" Remus said. 5, Harry said. "Right," Remus said. He looked at Sirius. "He's 5. I know. He's speculating about the possibility of runic parasitism being used to deceive the primary runesmith without their knowledge. He is. While eating a bread roll. He's been doing things like this since Privet Drive," Sirius said. "I've stopped being surprised. It's easier." Remus turned back to Harry. "It's possible," he said seriously, giving the question the full weight it deserved. "If the second placement was made at the same time as the first, and the secondary runesmith was present but not the primary architect, they could potentially layer within the work in progress without the primary runesmith being aware. It would require exceptional skill and proximity." "Someone who was there," Harry said. "Someone who was there," Remus agreed. "When your runes were placed." "When the runes were placed. 1981, Halloween, or close to it." Who had been there, who had been close enough to Harry, in the chaos of that night, to access a rune construction being placed in a newborn child's magical core without the primary runesmith, without Dumbledore, knowing? Sirius went cold. "Remus," he said. "The Liber Runicus. The 1823 Gareth translation. Did Peter have a copy?" Remus went absolutely still. The name sat in the room like a stone dropped into still water, the ripples moving outward, touching everything. Harry watched both of them with wide, silent eyes. "Peter," Remus said, in the voice of someone testing the weight of something they'd been carefully not thinking about. "Peter," Sirius said. "Peter is dead," Remus said. "He died in the street." He stopped. "I found his finger," Sirius said. "I was the one who reported it. I was the one who identified the scene." He met Remus's eyes. "A finger, Mooney. In a street full of debris. How hard would it have been to leave a finger?" Remus's face had gone very still. He looked down at the pub receipts in his hands. "You think Peter survived," he said quietly. "I think Peter betrayed James and Lily," Sirius said. "I think he's been alive since 1981. And I think he's been receiving reports on Harry's magical power levels from a set of runes he planted in a newborn's magical core, waiting to find out when Harry Potter became strong enough to be worth using." Remus closed his eyes. He sat with that for a moment, just sat with it, the way Remus sat with things, letting them settle to their full weight before he responded. "We need to be certain," he said, when he opened them. "Before we do anything with this. We need the rune analysis to be verifiable independently, we need a runic linguist who can confirm the Liber-Runicus connection, and we need to think very carefully about what we do next. Because if you're right, and Peter is alive, then Voldemort has a servant who's been tracking Harry for 4 years, Sirius said. And who knows his magical power levels in real time, Remus said. Which means they know how strong he's getting. Which means, he's a target, Harry said. They both looked at him. He was sitting very still, the bread roll finished, his hands quiet in his lap, meeting their eyes with a steadiness that seemed impossible in a 5-year-old. "I'm a target," he said again. "I was already a target. This just means someone's been tracking me while I'm a target." "Yes," Sirius said. "But we know about it now. Which is the difference between being hunted and being the one who can see the hunters. And we can use it," Harry said. "The anchor rune you made. You made them think I was still in Surrey. For another day or so, yes." Harry's brow furrowed. "Can we make a better one? One that lasts longer?" Sirius and Remus looked at each other over Harry's head. Remus had an expression on his face that was doing several things simultaneously, grief and recognition and something that might, if given time, become hope. "Yes," Remus said. "We can make a better one." He reached into his battered bag and pulled out a wooden case, which he opened on the table to reveal a set of runic tools, proper ones, not a stick and a pen, chisels and scribing tools and 3 small vials of something that caught the light gold. He looked at Harry. "Would you like to watch? Or would you rather sleep?" "Watch," Harry said immediately, and pulled his knees to his chest to make himself smaller and more comfortable and leaned forward with an expression of total attention. "He learns quickly," Sirius murmured, dropping into the chair beside Remus as he began laying out the tools. "He has to," Remus said quietly, just for Sirius, and the sentence landed somewhere between observation and indictment and neither of them said anything else about it. They worked through the afternoon, Remus scribing and Sirius holding the configuration and Harry watching with the focused silence of a child who is genuinely learning rather than performing the appearance of it. By evening they had a sustained anchor rune complex laid into a prepared slate tile, properly done this time, with the right tools and the right materials, that Remus estimated would maintain the false signal for 3 weeks. 3 weeks. Enough time to plan properly. Enough time to do this right. They ate dinner in the room, the cook, who had apparently adopted them in the full and committed manner of a man who had lost the argument with himself, brought up 3 bowls of something hot without being asked. Harry ate the whole bowl, which was the first time Sirius had seen him eat without watching himself, without the caution of a child not sure how much he was allowed. After dinner, Sirius told more stories. Remus added details, corrected Sirius twice, laughed once, quietly, at a story about the astronomy tower that clearly had more history than Sirius was including. Harry listened to all of it and asked questions at the precise right moments, and the questions were always the ones that cut to the thing that actually mattered, that stripped away the anecdote to the person underneath. What made Dad decide to stop being cruel about it? What did Mum do after? When she knew she'd been wrong? Did they ever fight about important things or just stupid things? At 9 o'clock Harry fell asleep mid-question about whether James had ever apologized properly for anything, and Sirius tucked the blanket up around him and stepped back and turned to find Remus watching him. "All right," Remus said quietly. "All right," Sirius agreed. Remus stopped. "When they arrested you." I know what you thought," Sirius said. "Everyone thought it. I don't blame you." "You should," Remus said. "I should have known. After 12 years, Sirius. You should have had a friend who wasn't so bloody clever about his lies," Sirius said. "Peter was better at this than any of us knew." "That's not your failure, that's his." He sat on the edge of his bed. "Tell me what the last 4 years looked like for you." So Remus told him. And it was bad, not Azkaban bad, but bad in the quieter, more sustained way of a man who'd lost everything he loved and had no one to grieve with, who'd been on the outside of the magical world looking in, who'd spent 4 years being too poor and too lycanthropic to find steady work and too lost to know what he was working toward. He told it without self-pity, which made it worse. He told it like he told everything, with the structure visible, the cause and effect laid out, as though the shape of the suffering were more manageable than its weight. When he finished, Sirius said, "We're not doing that anymore. Whatever comes next, the Ministry, Dumbledore, Peter, all of it, we're doing it together. The 3 of us." "The 3 of us," Remus said, looking at Harry's sleeping shape. "He's something, Sirius. I know. He's going to be, when he's trained, when he's grown, I know," Sirius said again. "But right now he's 5 and he's just learned that magic is real and he's been sleeping in a cupboard, and what he needs is not a prophecy or a training regime. He needs someone to make sure his shoes fit." Remus was quiet for a moment. "His shoes don't fit," he said. "I know. It's on the list." Sirius lay back on the bed. "We have 3 weeks. Let's use them." Outside the pub window, Northumberland was settling into the cold of a late September night, the castle dark on the hill, the market square empty, the street quiet under orange lamplight. In the room on the top floor, Harry Potter slept with his knees pulled up and his fist closed on the blanket, and he did not scream, and no one was watching. For the first time in 5 years, no one was watching. The rune on the slate tile pulsed its false signal steadily outward, and 3 weeks stretched ahead of them like open ground, and Sirius stared at the ceiling and began, very carefully, to plan. Chapter 3, The Signal. 3 weeks is not a long time to teach a child that his power belongs to him. It is, however, long enough to start. Remus began on the second morning in Alnwick with what he called a conversation and what was, in operational terms, Harry's first magic lesson. He sat across from Harry at the small table by the window with 2 cups of tea between them, one for himself, one for Harry, who held his with both hands and regarded it with the seriousness of someone who had recently discovered that hot things were available and intended to make the most of the development, and said, "Tell me what it feels like when the magic happens." Harry thought about it. "Hot," he said. "Like when you've been outside in the cold and you come inside, and your hands start to work properly again. Except it's everywhere, not just hands. And the thing that triggers it? Feeling things too much," Harry said, without hesitation. "When I'm scared or angry or, really happy, sometimes. Though that one's rarer." "When were you last really happy?" Remus said. Harry looked at his tea. "Yesterday," he said. "When you were showing me the rune tools." Remus nodded slowly, like a man confirming something he'd suspected. "The magic responds to intensity of feeling," he said. "Not type of feeling. That's important. Most children's accidental magic is driven by fear or anger because those are the most intense feelings a child typically has access to. But it's not that the magic prefers fear. It's that fear is usually the strongest thing available. He paused. Which tells us something about what your life has looked like. Harry met his eyes steadily. Yes, he said. If we can teach you to generate intensity from other feelings, Remus said, you gain considerably more control. And considerably more options. Because I'm not at the mercy of when the bad feelings happen, Harry said. Precisely. So we practice feelings, Harry said, with the tone of someone who has encountered a strange assignment and decided to approach it practically. We practice noticing them first, Remus said. Most people spend their lives not noticing what they're actually feeling. They feel something and immediately try to manage it, suppress it, redirect it. You've been doing that too, out of necessity. We're going to go the other direction. Sirius, who was sitting on his bed with his back to the wall pretending to look out the window while actually listening to every word, thought that this was either the best or the most dangerous idea he'd ever heard, and also that James would have absolutely hated this lesson and been the better for having it. What happened next was not dramatic. Harry sat at the table with his tea for about 20 minutes, and Remus talked him through the process in the unhurried way Remus did everything, no urgency, no performance, just attention, and at the end of 20 minutes Harry looked at the surface of his tea and it moved. Not a wave, not a dramatic magical display. A small, deliberate disturbance, the liquid shifting in a direction that had nothing to do with temperature or physics, responding to Harry's focus the way a compass responds to north. Harry looked at it. Then he looked up at Remus. Again, he said. He did it 4 more times before Sirius stopped pretending to look out the window. He's not suppressing the impulse, Sirius said, crossing to the table. Most children when they first do controlled magic, they reach for it. He's clearing the path, Remus said. Rather than pushing, he's removing resistance. That's an advanced instinct for a formally untrained child. I didn't know I was doing something specific, Harry said, looking up at them. I just did what felt right. That is almost always how the very talented ones do it, Remus said, with no inflection that would make the statement feel like flattery, which meant Harry received it as information rather than compliment and nodded and looked back at the tea. Can I try something bigger? He said. What did you have in mind? Harry looked at the window. Outside, a pigeon was sitting on the sill with the affronted dignity common to urban pigeons. Can I make it move without scaring it? He said. Sirius and Remus both looked at the pigeon. The pigeon looked back with complete indifference to the magical education being conducted on the other side of the glass. Try, Remus said. Harry looked at the pigeon for a long moment. His expression went inward in the particular way Sirius was beginning to recognize, the reaching without reaching, the clearing of the internal channel. And the pigeon, without any visible cause, ruffled its feathers, turned 45 degrees to the left, and flew away with the air of a bird who had decided to be somewhere else entirely of its own volition. Harry said, watching it go. That felt different to the tea. Because a living thing has its own magical current, Remus said, and his voice was doing the very careful neutral thing. A very small one, even in a non-magical creature. You interfaced with it, rather than acting on it directly. That distinction will matter a great deal later. It felt more like talking than pushing, Harry said. Yes, Remus said. That's exactly what it is. They looked at each other over Harry's head, and the look said several things that neither of them said aloud, about natural aptitude and 5 years of repression and what happened when a great deal of pressure was suddenly, carefully released. The days took on a rhythm. Mornings were Remus and Harry at the table, working through what Remus called foundation exercises but which looked from the outside like 2 people having a conversation, one of whom occasionally made things move. Afternoons were Sirius's time, less structured, more instinctive, which suited both of them. He took Harry out into Alnwick in Padfoot form, moving through the town with Harry's hand in his fur, and he used the walks to teach the other curriculum, how to notice an exit, how to read a crowd, how to move through a space without drawing attention. Not anxiety, not paranoia, practical situational awareness, delivered with the lightness of someone who genuinely enjoyed the application of it. Harry absorbed it the way he absorbed everything. Completely, and without showing off about it. On the fourth day, Sirius took him to the castle. It was open to tourists and the tourist crowd gave them cover, a large dog that was technically not supposed to be there, a small boy who looked like he was supposed to be with someone, a general impression of belonging that Sirius had learned to project and was teaching Harry to project too. They walked the battlements and Harry looked out over the town and the river and the moors beyond and said, "It looks like something out of a story." "You're going to live in a castle in 6 years," Sirius said. "Hogwarts," Harry said. "Hogwarts." Harry was quiet for a moment, looking out. The wind was doing something enthusiastic with his hair that was making it even more of a catastrophe than usual, which Sirius found increasingly difficult not to comment on because it was so specifically James and yet so specifically not. "Will I be a Gryffindor?" Harry said. "Your parents were." "I was." "Remus was." He paused. "No guarantees. The sorting is its own thing. But the hat tends to look for what's real in you, not what's inherited." "What's real in me?" Harry said. "I've known you 6 days," Sirius said. "But if I had to say, you're curious and you're brave and you think before you decide, but you decide fast once you've thought. You care about things more than you show." He looked at Harry. "That's Gryffindor enough for most purposes." Harry looked out at the moors. "What if I'm in a different house?" "Then you're in a different house," Sirius said simply. "I'll update my scarf collection." Harry looked at him. "You'd be okay with it?" "Harry, I spent 4 years in Azkaban for things I didn't do. I have achieved a level of perspective about Hogwarts house sorting that I could not have previously imagined." He looked down at his godson. "You could end up in Slytherin and I'd still be at the station with a sign." Harry considered this. "Then, what would the sign say?" "Something embarrassing," Sirius said. "I haven't decided the specific text yet. I've got 6 years." Harry laughed, a real one, surprised out of him, slightly too loud for the castle battlements, and Sirius stored it away beside the other ones he'd been collecting, small inventory of sounds that had not existed in his life 12 days ago and now felt foundational. On the 6th day, the signal changed. Remus noticed first. He'd been running daily analyses of the rune transmission, checking the anchor tile, comparing the output against his reconstruction of the original structure, and he came into the room from his own space down the hall with the particular quality of movement that meant something had happened. Harry was practicing, trying to hold a small stone suspended in the air above his palm. He'd gotten it to 8 seconds the day before, and Remus crossed directly to the table where his runic tools were laid out. "Someone's querying the signal," he said, without preamble. Sirius was on his feet. "Querying how?" "A return pulse. Someone sent a narrowband inquiry through the tracking rune network, essentially a ping, checking that the signal is what it appears to be." Remus was already working, his scribing tool moving across a fresh piece of parchment. "The good news is the anchor held. It returned a signal consistent with Harry's baseline output, which is what a query would expect to find." "The bad news," Sirius said. "The bad news is that someone queried it," Remus said. "Which means someone noticed something was slightly off. Not off enough to break the anchor, but off enough to check." He looked up. The query came from Hogwarts. "Dumbledore is suspicious." "Dumbledore knows I escaped," Sirius said. "It'll have been in the Prophet within a day of my going over the wall. He'll have gone to check on Harry and found him gone. And the anchor rune is functioning, so he's read it as Harry still in Surrey," Remus said. "But he queried it, which means the discrepancy is subtle enough that he's doing a manual check rather than sending a response team." "He'd be running the query himself," Sirius said. "Not through the Ministry. If he went through the Ministry he'd have to explain that he had an unsanctioned tracking network on a 5-year-old, which, even for Dumbledore, that's a conversation he'd prefer not to have." Harry, who had let the stone drop gently to the table when Remus came in, was listening. "So he knows something's wrong," he said. "But not what?" "Not yet," Remus said. "What does he do when he figures it out?" "He comes looking," Sirius said. "Which is why we need to have this conversation now rather than when he's on the doorstep." He sat down across from Harry. "Dumbledore he is not our enemy. I need you to understand that. He's a man who made decisions that I think were wrong, particularly about you, and I intend to have a very serious conversation with him about those decisions. But he's not working against you. He thinks he knows best," Harry said. "Yes," Sirius said. "And he's usually right enough that it's hard to argue with him, which makes the exceptions to that pattern more dangerous, not less." "The runes are an exception," Harry said. "The runes are a significant exception," Sirius agreed. "And more importantly, whatever he intended with the runes, someone else used them. Used him. And he needs to know that." Remus set down his scribing tool. "You want to contact him," he said. "I want to contact him before he contacts us," Sirius said. "On our terms, with our evidence, in a way that gives us the position. The Ministry has your arrest warrant, Sirius. If Dumbledore knows where you are, Dumbledore doesn't talk to the Ministry about things he's doing himself," Sirius said. "He goes his own way. Always has. Which means if I reach out to him directly, I'm having a conversation with Dumbledore, not triggering a Ministry response." He looked at Remus. "You know I'm right." Remus was quiet for a moment, doing the thing where he ran it from every angle before committing. "I know you're probably right," he said. "What I'm less sure about is the timing. We have maybe a week before the anchor degrades enough that a direct inspection would reveal it," Sirius said. "If we wait until he knows for certain that the signal is spoofed, we lose the initiative. If we contact him now, you can frame it," Harry said. They both looked at him. "If you go to him now," Harry said slowly, working through it as he spoke, "he doesn't know what you know. He doesn't know about the second set of runes, or who might have put them there. You have information he needs. Which means you can decide what to tell him and when and how." He paused. "Whereas if you wait until he comes looking, it's his meeting, not yours." Sirius leaned back in his chair and looked at his godson with an expression he couldn't quite keep neutral. "You're 5, he said. "You keep saying that," Harry said. "I keep meaning it as an observation, not a criticism." "Write the letter," Harry said. "But don't tell him where we are yet. Tell him what you found and ask him why." "Put him on the defensive," Remus said slowly. "Put him in the position of explaining himself," Harry said. "Before anything else. Because then you know how much you can trust what he says next." A silence settled in the room. Outside, Alnwick moved through its morning, the market stalls opening, the first tourists beginning their approach to the castle, the ordinary machinery of a town that had no idea what was sitting in the room above its pub. "Remus," Sirius said. "I'll get parchment," Remus said, already moving. The letter took 2 hours to draft, which was longer than it should have been and shorter than it felt. The difficulty was not saying too much, not revealing the full extent of the evidence, not providing a location, not giving Dumbledore any more than the minimum he needed to begin the conversation. What they sent was this, a precise description of the first rune set, rendered in Remus's immaculate runic notation, with the question why written in Sirius's handwriting underneath. Nothing else. No location. No demand. Just the rune structure and the question. They sent it through the relay point in the pub's front room, and then they waited. Dumbledore's response arrived in 4 hours, which was faster than Sirius expected and which said something about the state of the headmaster's attention over the last 12 days. The owl was not a Hogwarts owl, a personal bird, small and very fast, which was in itself informative about how private Dumbledore wanted this exchange. The letter was 2 pages in his spidery hand, and Sirius read it aloud at the table with Remus looking over his shoulder and Harry sitting cross-legged on the bed with his hands in his lap. The letter acknowledged the runes. Did not apologize for them, which was consistent with Dumbledore's general position on decisions he'd made from necessity. It explained the intent, monitoring for Harry's safety, the ability to respond quickly if the Dursley environment became actively dangerous, the magical development tracking designed to alert Dumbledore if Harry's core showed signs of instability or interference from residual dark magic. All of which was, Sirius noted grimly, both plausible and inadequate as justification. Then came the part that was interesting. I note, Sirius, that you have described the monitoring structure in singular terms. I would ask, if you have performed a full analysis of what you found, whether you observed anything in the construction that seemed inconsistent with the work as I laid it. I have had reason, over the past year, to suspect that certain elements of the structure were altered at some point after the initial placement, in a manner I have been unable to fully account for. Your letter suggests you may have found the explanation I have been looking for. Sirius lowered the letter. He knows about the second set. He knows something is wrong, Remus said. He doesn't know what. Or he's telling us he knows something is wrong, Harry said, from the bed, to see if we'll tell him what we found. They both turned to look at him. Testing whether we trust him, Harry said simply. If we tell him about the second set and he genuinely didn't know, he'll be horrified and useful. If he knew all along, we've just told him we have evidence that could embarrass him. That's an extremely cynical reading of Albus Dumbledore, Remus said carefully. Is it wrong? Harry said. Remus opened his mouth and closed it again. No, he said. It's not wrong. It's the reading you'd make if you'd been a resource rather than a person for the last 5 years. Harry looked at him steadily. I'm not saying he's bad, he said. I'm saying we should be careful. We should be careful, Sirius agreed. He set the letter on the table. We respond. We tell him about the second set of runes, but not the grammar analysis, and not Peter. We tell him someone added a secondary receiver, we give him the structure of that, and we ask him who had access to Harry at the time of the original placement. And we see what name he gives, Remus said. We see what name he gives, Sirius said. And whether it matches the name we already have. The second letter was shorter. They described the secondary rune set, its structure, its placement, the fact that it was reading exclusively power output data, and asked the access question. They sent it back on the same owl. Dumbledore's response came in 2 hours this time. It was one word. A name. Pettigrew. Sirius put the letter flat on the table and pressed both hands down on it and breathed through his nose for a moment. He knew, Remus said. His voice was steady but the steadiness was load-bearing. He suspected Peter. He's been looking at this for a year and he'd narrowed it to Peter. He didn't tell anyone, Sirius said. He needed confirmation, Remus said, with a fairness that cost him something to apply. Or he thought he needed more than a runic anomaly to act on. He didn't tell me, Sirius said. You were in Azkaban, Remus said quietly. I was in Azkaban for something Peter did. The words came out flat and final, like stones being set in a wall. The man who has just confirmed that Peter Pettigrew planted surveillance runes in my godson's magical core chose not to move on Peter's survival, chose not to pursue the question of who actually betrayed James and Lily, and left Harry in a house where he was sleeping in a cupboard under the stairs. The room was very quiet. Harry was watching Sirius from the bed. He wasn't alarmed by the anger, he'd been around Sirius's anger long enough by now to understand that it was directional, controlled, purposeful. He was watching the way he watched magic, to understand it. What do we do? Harry said. Sirius looked at his godson. The fury settled, not gone but contained, directed, the same process that had gotten him across the North Sea, the same process that had opened the cupboard lock and scratched the anchor rune into the garden and walked them down Privet Drive in the early morning light. Anger was not chaos. Anger was fuel. We find Peter, Sirius said. And then we bring him in front of the people who need to see him, and we make sure the seeing is public enough that it can't be quietly managed. How do we find him? Remus said. He was already at the table with his tools. Already in motion, because Remus's way of handling grief was to find the next useful thing and do it. The runes, Harry said. They looked at him again. They're still transmitting, Harry said. He looked down at his hands. To both places. The anchor is spoofing the signal, but the rune structure itself, the second set, it still has a receiving end. A fixed point. He looked up. Can you run it backwards? Sirius stared at his godson. You can't run a tracking rune backwards, he said. The signal is one-directional. He stopped. The receiving rune has to be anchored, Remus said slowly, his voice changing as he worked through it. To receive a signal, you need a fixed point, a rune array that's keyed to the specific transmission frequency. That array is somewhere. And if you know the transmission frequency, he looked at Sirius. You could locate the receiver by searching for the resonant array. It's not straightforward, Sirius said. You'd need to read the transmission frequency directly from the source, which means you'd need to read it from me, Harry said. He was very calm about this. From the runes in my magic. Harry, direct core access, I know what it feels like, Harry said. I've been feeling it for 2 weeks. I know where it sits. He met Sirius's eyes. I'm not fragile. The statement landed with a weight that was mostly about the cupboard and the shoes that didn't fit and 4 years of nobody coming, and Sirius felt it in his chest and also recognized that Harry was right, not about the rune access being safe, but about the other thing, about being told what he couldn't handle. It's not about fragile, Sirius said carefully. Core access requires consent and cooperation and trust between the person doing the reading and the person being read. I could do it, carefully, with Remus guiding the runic side, but I want you to understand exactly what it means before you agree. Tell me what it means. You'll feel me in your magic, Sirius said. Like, someone reading over your shoulder, except the book is you. It's not painful. But it's intimate in a way that's hard to describe without having done it. Harry was quiet for a moment. Have you done it to someone before? Your mother did it to me once, Sirius said. When I was 17 and she was trying to determine whether I'd interfere with a spell she was running. He paused. I trusted her. It was fine. And I trust you, Harry said, with the flat simplicity that he deployed for things he'd already decided were true. When? Tonight, Remus said, from the table, not looking up. I'll have the equipment ready. They spent the afternoon not talking about it, which was its own kind of preparation. Sirius took Harry out in Padfoot form, a longer walk than usual, north along the river where the land opened up into something more honest than the town, bracken and rock and the particular quality of North England sky that was either threatening or magnificent depending on your mood. Harry walked with his hand in Sirius's fur and actually talked, not the careful measured speech of someone managing a conversation, but rambled, which was a thing he'd been doing more of in the last week. He talked about the pigeon and whether it had been startled or genuinely moved. He talked about the rune tools and which of Remus's he was allowed to hold and which were apparently for looking only. He talked about Hogwarts and what he imagined it looked like, and his imagining was detailed and specific and was mostly composed of the Alnwick Castle overlaid with the stories he'd been given, the jazz toilet incident retrofitted into a plausible architectural feature. He did not talk about tonight. But he walked with the purposefulness of someone who has decided something and is letting it settle into certainty. That evening, Remus arranged the room. Not elaborately, Remus's arrangement was functional, precise, the minimum necessary done with maximum care. The runic tools laid out in order. A containment circle drawn lightly on the floorboards in chalk, not a binding circle, just a focusing boundary, something to keep the energies of the working from dispersing. Harry sat in the center of it cross-legged and Sirius sat across from him and Remus sat to the side where he could guide and observe and intervene if necessary, his wand loose in his hand. We're looking for a frequency signature, Remus said. The second rune set has a specific transmission pattern, a runic frequency, like a note in music. When Sirius reaches your core, he's looking for that note. We record it, and then we use it to locate the resonant receiver. How long? Harry said. 5 minutes, Remus said. Probably less. Okay, Harry said. He looked at Sirius. I'm ready. Close your eyes, Sirius said. And do the thing you do when you're practicing. The clearing. Harry closed his eyes. His breathing steadied almost immediately. Sirius could see the moment it shifted, see the deliberate dropping of surface tension that Remus had been teaching him, the opening of the channel. His magic stirred and settled, finding a natural rhythm. Sirius reached. Core access was like listening with your whole body, not a word or an image or a sensation exactly, but a complete apprehension of something that existed on a register slightly outside normal perception. Harry's core was not adequate. It was like stepping into a room that turned out to be a cathedral, the ceiling somewhere overhead beyond visibility, the walls distant. 5 years old, and this was what sat behind the careful quiet of him, behind the hands in his lap and the steady green eyes and the pragmatic acceptance of terrible situations. Sirius felt the first rune said immediately, Dumbledore's work, the familiar grammar, the careful monitoring structure running like a second heartbeat through the whole thing. And behind it, threaded through it, the second set, rougher, the substitutions visible once you were inside looking at them, the Liber Runicus errors reproduced faithfully. The frequency was there. A specific signature, a runic harmonic, as individual as a voice. Sirius held it and pulled back, carefully, the way you back out of a room you've entered by mistake, slow, deliberate, without disturbing anything. Harry's eyes opened as soon as the contact ended. Done, he said. Done, Sirius said. He looked at Remus. I have it. Remus was already working. The frequency Sirius described, translated from perception into runic notation in the specific technical language they'd been using, went onto parchment, and Remus cross-referenced it against the rune grammar analysis and the Liber Runicus errors and spent 20 minutes building what he called a resonance map, a working that, applied to a standard word detection framework, would register any active rune array keyed to that specific frequency within a radius that depended on the strength of the broadcasting array. How far? Sirius asked. The transmission is strong, Remus said. Stronger than it needs to be for local range. This is built to receive from a significant distance. He paused. The receiver would need to be similarly powerful to maintain a stable return signal for 5 years. I'd estimate we're looking for something at least the size of a room ward array, probably larger. If it's in a building, the building's magical structure might be amplifying it. Peter would need somewhere to be, Sirius said. Not Hogwarts, not Ministry adjacent, somewhere off the grid. Somewhere he could set up an active runic receiver and maintain it for years without anyone noticing. Or somewhere someone maintained it for him, Remus said. If he's been in hiding, he's not maintaining anything himself. Someone's been keeping that receiver active. Voldemort's remaining circle, Sirius said. Whoever took him in after 1981, whoever's been keeping whatever is left of him from disappearing completely. Quirrell, Remus said suddenly. Sirius looked up. Quirinus Quirrell, Remus said. He went abroad, traveled widely, came back last year. The timing is speculative, Sirius said. Everything is speculative, Remus said. But the timeline and the geography. If someone was traveling to find what remained of Voldemort after 1981, Quirrell went to the right places at the right times. He met Sirius's eyes. I've been thinking about it for months. I had time to think. Where's the receiver? Harry said. They both looked at him. You said you could locate the resonant receiver using the frequency, Harry said. Have you done the working? I need to send the detection pulse first, Remus said. And that requires an active conduit, the runes in me, Harry said. They're the only active conduit we have. You'd send it through them. Harry, that's what you were about to say, isn't it? Harry said. He was looking at Remus with the focused assessment he turned on things he wanted to understand. The detection pulse has to travel along the existing transmission pathway to find the receiver. The pathway runs through me. It does, Remus said. And that's not a simple working. That's using your core as a relay, which requires you to actively cooperate with a pulse of foreign runic energy traveling through your magical structure. It's safe in theory, then let's do it in practice, Harry said. Tomorrow, Sirius said. Tonight was enough. You need sleep, and Remus needs to build the working properly, and rushing it helps no one. Harry looked like he wanted to argue. Then he looked at Sirius's face and saw something there, not a hedge, not an avoidance, just the genuine assessment of someone who knew how to manage an operation and was saying not yet, but yes, and nodded. Tomorrow, he agreed. He was asleep within minutes of lying down, the absolute unconsciousness of a child who has used up everything available. Sirius sat by the window while Remus worked at the table, building the detection working with his immaculate focus, and outside Alnwick was dark and quiet and the castle on the hill was a bulk of shadow against the stars. He's different, Remus said, not looking up from his work. From what I expected. What did you expect? I don't know, Remus said. Something more, fragile, maybe. After the cupboard, after the Dursleys. Children who've been treated the way he's been treated often come out very shut down, or very reactive, or both. He came out careful, Sirius said. He came out clear, Remus said. He put down his scribing tool for a moment and looked at Harry's sleeping shape. He sees things very directly. Without the social overlays that most people carry around, the assumptions about how things work and what's possible and who has authority over what. He just looks at what's actually there. Is that good? Sirius said. It's remarkable, Remus said. And yes, I think so. Though it's going to make certain parts of his life quite difficult. Which parts? The parts where people expect him to pretend they're something other than what they are, Remus said. He picked up the scribing tool. He's going to be wonderful at that. Sirius smiled, small and honest. Yeah, he said. I know. In the morning, Remus ran the detection pulse. It was not dramatic. It looked, from the outside, like Remus kneeling in front of Harry with one hand extended toward him and his eyes closed, and Harry sitting very still with his own eyes closed and his hands flat on his knees, while Sirius stood by the door and felt the air in the room shift with something that wasn't quite pressure and wasn't quite sound but was the combined sensation of two magical working running in the same space at the same time. It lasted 40 seconds. Remus sat back on his heels and opened his eyes and looked down at the detection array he'd built on a plate of prepared slate. The resonance map was showing a cluster in the west of Scotland, not a precise location, not a building, but a region. 40 miles across, narrowing to a point that suggested, somewhere remote, Remus said. Northwest Highlands. No significant wizarding settlement in that region. An outbuilding, maybe. A ruin. How do we narrow it? Sirius said. Physical proximity, Remus said. The closer we get, the sharper the reading. Within a mile, it should resolve to the exact location. We're going to the Northwest Highlands, Harry said. He didn't frame it as a question. We're going to the Northwest Highlands, Sirius said. Good, said Harry, and got up to put his shoes on, and Sirius noticed for the first time that his shoes fit now. Remus had sorted it in the second week, quietly, without making a thing of it, and something about that particular detail, the smallest possible domestic detail, sat in his chest with a weight disproportionate to its size. They packed up their room in 20 minutes, there wasn't much to pack. They left the anchor tile in a gap between the floorboards where it would continue its quiet deception for another 2 weeks, misdirecting Dumbledore and Pettigrew simultaneously. They settled their account with the cook, who shook Harry's hand with the gravity of a formal farewell and told him to eat more, and who looked at Padfoot with the expression of a man who had lost many arguments with himself about many strays and would continue to do so. They were on the road north by mid-morning. Sirius ran point in dog form, Remus and Harry walking behind, Harry with his hand in Remus's, which had started happening on the third day of their acquaintance without fanfare or announcement. Remus had looked down at the small hand in his and looked straight ahead again and kept walking, and that had been it. Harry matched his pace to Remus's longer stride, and they moved through the town and out onto the road beyond, and Sirius ran ahead and circled back and ran ahead again, testing the edges of the space the way Padfoot always had, because that was what dogs did and what Sirius needed to do, which was the same thing. Ahead of them, somewhere in the Northwest Highlands, a rune array was transmitting in a specific frequency to a specific receiver in Harry's core, and had been doing so for 5 years, and the person on the other end of it didn't know that his frequency had been read, his signal reversed, his location narrowed to a 40-mile region that was going to shrink very quickly. Peter Pettigrew had been hiding for 5 years. He was about to be found by a dog. Chapter 4, the hearing that wasn't the Scottish Highlands in late October were beautiful the way a knife is beautiful, cold and clear and absolutely indifferent to whether you appreciated the view. They'd been walking for 2 days north of Alnwick when Sirius called a halt at a village called Kinlochbeg that was barely large enough to justify the name, consisting of a post office, a pub, 7 houses, and a sheep population that outnumbered the human one by a ratio that suggested the sheep were winning. The pub had rooms. Sirius took 2 of them in cash and they sat around a small table in the room Remus and Harry were sharing while the wind did something committed to the windows and the detection slate sat in the middle of the table between 3 cups of tea. The resonance point had sharpened considerably over the 2 days of travel. It was now reading as a specific location, not a building, but a geographical feature. A hill. A specific hill 12 miles northwest of Kinlochbeg, which Remus identified on the Ordnance Survey map as a place called Carn Durge, Red Hill, in the Gaelic, which had on its eastern slope, according to the map, a feature marked as ruins, medieval. Medieval ruins in the Scottish Highlands, Sirius said. Nobody there, no regular visitors, no Muggle infrastructure within 6 miles. Perfect place to maintain an active rune array if you needed somewhere no one would check, Remus said. Peter's not there, Harry said. He was looking at the slate, not the map. The signal is coming from there. But the receiver is there, not the person reading it. Sirius looked at him. Explain. The array broadcasts the received data to a secondary location, Harry said. I could feel it. When Remus ran the detection pulse, the signal from the second set of runes in me goes to the ruins, and then, it keeps moving. The ruins are a relay point, not a destination. Remus set down his tea very carefully. You felt a tertiary transmission, he said. I think so. Harry looked uncertain, which was unusual enough to be informative. He'd developed confidence in his perceptions over the 3 weeks in Alnwick and it took something genuinely ambiguous to make him hedge. It felt like the signal hit the ruins and then went somewhere else. But I couldn't feel where. The ruins would amplify and redirect, Remus said, already thinking through it. If Peter is on the move, not static, not maintaining a permanent location, he'd need a relay. Something fixed that received the data and forwarded it to wherever he currently was. The ruins would be the fixed point. Peter could be anywhere within receiver range. How far is receiver range for a relay of that size? Sirius said. From a relay anchored in medieval stone that's been sitting on a ley line for several hundred years. Remus looked at the map. Britain. He could be anywhere in Britain. The wind hit the windows again, hard enough to flex the glass. Right, Sirius said. He looked at the slate. Then at the map. Then at the particular quality of Remus's expression, which was the look of a man who had just run the logical sequence to its endpoint and didn't love where it landed. We go to the ruins, Sirius said. Not to find Peter. To find the relay array. And if we can get to the relay array, we can read the forwarding address. That's not simple, Remus said. Very little about this is simple, Sirius agreed. Can you do it? With the right equipment and enough time, yes. Remus folded the map. We go tomorrow. Today I need to build the reading framework. Harry looked at Sirius. Can I help? Sirius thought about the detection pulse, about Harry sitting with his hands flat on his knees while Remus's working ran through his core, about the absolute stillness of him during the process and the way he described what he felt afterward, precise, technical, useful. He thought about 31 runes that were still transmitting, still reading his godson's emotional state and power output and location, every hour of every day. He thought about Peter Pettigrew somewhere in Britain reading the data. Yes, Sirius said. But Remus leads it. You do what he says, when he says it, and if either of us says stop you stop immediately. Yes. Yes, Harry said, with the straightforwardness that meant he'd already decided this before asking. Remus worked through the afternoon, and Harry worked with him, not just watching now but actively assisting, holding pieces of the construction in focus while Remus built the next layer, the way you'd hold two wires touching while someone soldered them. He was good at it. He was unsettlingly good at it, the kind of good that came from a natural aptitude running into its first real outlet after 5 years of having nowhere to go. Sirius left them to it and went downstairs to the pub. He needed to think, and he needed to think without the distraction of watching Harry be extraordinary, because the watching tended to produce a complicated mixture of pride and fury that was difficult to reason through. He sat at the bar with a pint he didn't particularly want and turned the problem over in his mind, looking at it from the angle he'd been avoiding. Peter was alive. Peter had a relay array in the Scottish Highlands forwarding data on Harry's magical development to an unknown current location. The data Peter was reading was Harry's power output, how strong the boy was, how fast his power was growing. What was the purpose of that information? If Voldemort was genuinely destroyed, if the curse's rebound had dispersed him completely, nothing remaining, then there was no purpose. The information was being read by a traitor in hiding, maintained by habit or guilt or the particular madness of someone who'd built their life around a master who no longer existed. But if Voldemort was not completely destroyed, if something remained, some fragment, some form, then Peter's data reading was an intelligence operation. And the question was not just where is Harry but is Harry strong enough yet? Strong enough for what? Sirius drank his pint and stared at the bar and thought about the rune array's specificity, the singular focus on magical power output, nothing else. Not Harry's location beyond broad geographical data, not his health, not his relationships or his education or his emotional development. Just the raw power number, tracked across 5 years of growth. You'd want that data if you were planning to come back. If you were waiting for the right moment, the right conditions. If you needed to know whether the thing that had broken you had grown into something you could break back. Or, and this was the thought that made Sirius set down his pint, if you needed to know how strong Harry was before you made your move, because you were afraid of him, and you wanted to wait until you were stronger than he was before you struck. Versus waiting until you were strong enough that it didn't matter how strong Harry was. Two different strategies. Both involved tracking. Both involved Peter. But one of them meant the timing of any move against Harry was contingent on Harry's power level, which meant Harry's rapid magical development was actively a threat to whatever remained of Voldemort's planning. The faster Harry grew, the shorter the window. The window for what, Sirius didn't know yet. But he intended to find out before it opened. He went back upstairs. Remus and Harry were sitting on the floor with the completed reading framework between them, which looked like a larger and more complex version of the detection slate, a prepared tile surrounded by a ring of inscribed runic text, 3 layers deep, with a focusing crystal in the center. Harry had ink on his hands from the scribing, which he had apparently been assisting with, and was eating a biscuit from a packet that Remus had produced from somewhere in his bag with the air of a man who had learned to travel with emergency provisions. "Ready?" Sirius said. "For tomorrow," Remus said. "Tonight we sleep. The working I need to do at the ruins requires more concentration than I have left at." He looked at the window, at the dark outside, whatever time that is. 9, Harry said. 9, Remus agreed. Sleep. They went to Carn Dirge the next morning, leaving just after dawn in a mist that sat on the hills like something that had been there since before the concept of weather was formally introduced. Remus carried the reading framework in his bag. Sirius ran ahead as Padfoot, covering the ground faster, checking the approach. Harry walked beside Remus in the particular silence of someone who is not nervous but is gathered, attentive, present, ready. The ruins were on the eastern slope as the map had shown, a low stone structure, roofless, the walls barely shoulder height in most places, the floor choked with heather and decades of windblown debris. Old. Not just old in the sense of weathered but old in the particular sense that magical locations acquired when they'd been in continuous runic use for a very long time, the stone itself saturated, the air in the interior of the roofless structure thicker with active magic than anything in the surrounding landscape. Harry stopped at the entrance and said, "Oh. What?" Sirius said, "Already human." "It's loud," Harry said. He pressed one hand to the stone of the doorway. "The magic here. It's like standing next to something running. A machine." "Ley line intersection," Remus said, moving past them into the interior and already scanning. The medieval builders used these sites deliberately. They couldn't formulate the runic theory but they could feel the energy nodes and they built on them. He was walking the interior perimeter, his wand out now, running a diagnostic sweep. "Here." The relay array was in the northwest corner of the ruins, set into the base of the wall at ground level, a series of runes carved directly into the stone, ancient incision, the new carvings cut over and alongside much older markings in a way that made the original construction look like deliberate camouflage, the Peter Pettigrew runes hiding in the company of centuries of existing runic text. Clever. Genuinely clever in a way that Sirius hadn't, until now, been attributing to Peter, which was probably his mistake. Peter's apparent mediocrity had always been partly performance, partly the effect of standing next to James and Sirius, who both tended to fill the available space. Remus crouched in front of the array with the reading framework and began to work. Harry stood beside him. Sirius stood at the doorway of the ruins, watching the approach, Padfoot senses at full extension, reading the wind for anything that didn't belong. 20 minutes. Then Remus sat back on his heels and looked at the tile in his hands. "There's a secondary forwarding address," he said. "It's not a fixed location, it's a person-bound receiver, which means the forwarded signal goes to a runic array that's carried on the person, not housed somewhere static." He paused. "The person-bound receiver is keyed to a specific magical signature." "Peter's," Sirius said. "No," Remus said. He looked up. "It's not Peter's signature. The magical signature this is keyed to is degraded, fragmented, like," he stopped. "Like someone who was destroyed but not completely," Sirius said. "Like someone who died but not entirely," Remus said, "precisely." "Yes." The wind moved through the ruins. The heather bent and straightened. "Voldemort's been reading Harry's power data himself," Sirius said. "Not just Peter. Whatever's left of him, whatever form he's in, he has a person-bound receiver. He's been tracking Harry directly." Harry's voice came from behind him, calm as water. "Good." They both looked at him. "If he's tracking me," Harry said, "it means he's afraid of what I'm going to be." He looked at the rune array in the corner of the ruins, at the centuries of stone and the new carvings hiding in the old, at Remus's reading framework with its light-filled crystal. "It means he thinks I'm worth being afraid of." Sirius looked at his godson standing in the ruins on a Scottish hillside in the October mist, 5 years old, covered in rune ink, eating the last of Remus's biscuits. He thought about the cupboard under the stairs. He thought about shoes that didn't fit and too big clothes and a child who had learned not to show what he wanted. He thought about 61 runes placed in an infant's magical core before the child could speak. "Yes," Sirius said. "He is." "Then we should give him something to be afraid of," Harry said, and went back to looking at the ruins with the considering expression of someone taking inventory. They returned to Kinlochbeg, and Sirius sat on his bed and thought for most of the night, and what he was thinking about was not Peter and not Voldemort and not the ruins on the hillside. He was thinking about Amelia Bones. He'd been thinking about her on and off since Alnwick, the way you think about a move in a chess game that you're not quite ready to make but that you know you'll eventually have to. Amelia Bones, head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, was the specific kind of person who was both an obstacle and an asset depending on which direction you approached her from. She was not corrupt, Sirius would have staked his life on that, and had been in a position over the years to know the difference. She was not stupid. She was not political in the way that most ministry officials were political, which was to say she didn't do the thing where being right mattered less than being comfortable. What she was principled. And principle was the thing you could work with, if you brought the right argument. The evidence they had was real. The rune analysis was verifiable. Any trained runologist at the ministry could look at Remus's notation and confirm the second set structure, confirm the Liber Runicus signature, confirm the forwarding address. The relay array at Carn Dirge was physical evidence. The person-bound receiver reading confirmed that Voldemort, something that had been Voldemort, was still extant. Sirius had been convicted of 13 murders and of being Voldemort's most loyal follower. At a trial he had never actually been given. There had been no Veritaserum. No wand examination. No actual witnesses, only the aftermath of the street, which Peter had arranged to look exactly as damning as possible. The case against Sirius Black consisted entirely of the word of people who had arrived after the fact and assumed. He needed Amelia Bones to look at the rune evidence. He needed her to look at it in a room where she had no choice but to respond to what it actually said, without the ministry apparatus of assumption around her. He couldn't do that while he was officially a fugitive. He needed to walk into the ministry as something other than an escaped prisoner. He started planning. It took him 4 days. 4 days during which Remus continued Harry's lessons with increasing ambition. They'd moved past the stone and the pigeon into more deliberate structured workings, Remus teaching Harry the rudiments of formal magical theory at a level usually not attempted until age 9 or 10, and Harry absorbing it with the infuriating ease of someone for whom the theory was simply the explanation for things he'd already noticed. Sirius helped when Harry needed physical demonstration and stayed out of the way when he didn't, and between lesson blocks he was writing letters. Letters to the Daily Prophet, prepared but not yet sent. Letters to 3 specific solicitors, one of whom owed Sirius's family a significant professional favor that had survived Sirius's imprisonment by virtue of being owed to the family name rather than to Sirius personally. Letters outlining the runic evidence in enough legal detail to constitute a formal complaint under the Wizarding Judicial Review Act, a provision of the law that almost nobody used because it required the complainant to appear in person before the head of magical law enforcement. In person. No intermediaries. No owl submissions. The head of the DMLE was required by law to personally hear a formal judicial review complaint from any wizard citizen who presented in person with documented evidence. Sirius Black was not currently a wizard citizen by any functional definition, having been convicted and imprisoned without trial. But the conviction itself was potentially invalidated by the evidence now in hand. The rune evidence was circumstantial to his conviction, but it established the active survival of Peter Pettigrew in a form that could be traced to a specific magical signature, and that changed the factual basis of his entire case. He needed Amelia Bones to look at the evidence before she had time to make it a ministry operation, before anyone could quietly manage what was being revealed. He needed to walk in, hand her Remus's rune analysis and the relay array evidence, and let the weight of it do the work. "You're going to walk into the ministry," Remus said, on the 4th evening. "I'm going to walk into the ministry," Sirius confirmed. "They'll arrest you." "They'll try," Sirius said. The judicial review provision grants provisional immunity to the complainant from the moment of submission until the matter is formally reviewed. I looked it up in 1979 when James thought we might need it for something else. That provision has never actually been tested, Remus said. "First time for everything," Sirius said. "And if they arrest you anyway?" "Then I'm no worse off than I was in Azkaban," Sirius said, "except that the evidence is now formally on record, which means they can't quietly bury it." He looked at Remus. "I'm not walking in blind. I'm walking in with everything, the rune analysis, the relay array documentation, the forwarding address signature, and a 12-page submission under the Judicial Review Act that Petrus Allgate spent 2 of those 4 days helping me draft." Petrus Allgate, Remus said. The Aldgate firm owes the Black family. They do. And Petrus he's not the kind of man who takes a payment and then fails to perform. He drafted the submission. He can't attend without being seen, but the document itself is watertight. Sirius met Remus's eyes. I know what I'm doing. Remus was quiet for a moment. I know you do, he said. That's not what worries me. What worries you? That you're right about what the evidence shows, Remus said, and that it won't matter to the right people. That Amelia Bones looks at it and agrees it's compelling, and then the minister's office gets involved and suddenly the evidence is being reviewed and quietly going nowhere, and you're in a cell somewhere. Then, Sirius said, I made sure that Petrus Aldgate has a second set of documents. Which go to the prophet if I'm not out of the ministry by 6 o'clock on the day I go in. A pause. You said a dead man's switch, Remus said. I said a deadline, Sirius said. There's a difference. Harry's voice came from the next room, where he'd nominally been asleep for an hour. Can I come? Sirius looked at the wall between the rooms. No. Why not? Because you're 5, Sirius said. That's not a reason, Harry said. That's a category. It's a very relevant category, Sirius said. A pause. Will you come back? Harry said. The question was asked in the same neutral tone as everything Harry asked, but underneath it was the weight of something that had been asked many times in many forms and had never received a reliable answer. Sirius got up and went to the connecting door and opened it. Harry was lying on his back on his bed in the dark, staring at the ceiling, hands on his chest. Sirius sat on the edge of the bed. Yes, he said. I'll come back. How do you know? Because I'm not going in to fight, Sirius said. I'm going in to make them look at something they can't unsee once they've seen it. That's different from a fight. A fight you can lose. Making someone look at a truth, you either succeed or they make themselves look worse by refusing. Harry was quiet for a moment. Take Remus's wand, he said. He has 2. Sirius blinked. Remus has 2 wands. He thinks I don't know about the second one, Harry said, with a trace of something that might have been amusement if it hadn't been quite so matter-of-fact. It's in the inside pocket of the bag, not with the tools. It's shorter. I think it's a spare. Sirius made a mental note to ask Remus about the second wand. Go to sleep, he said. Only if you take the wand, Harry said. I'll ask him, Sirius said. That's not the same as taking it, Harry said. Sirius looked at his godson, who was looking back at him with Lily's eyes and James's stubbornness and something that was purely his own, the particular quality of his persistence, which was not aggressive but was absolute, the kind of determination that didn't come from arrogance but from having decided something was important and seeing no good reason to pretend otherwise. Fine, Sirius said. I'll take the wand. Good, Harry said, and closed his eyes. Sirius took the wand. Remus handed it over without being asked when Sirius told him, which meant Remus had already thought of it and had been deciding whether to offer. The wand was shorter, 9 inches, blackthorn, a rescue from a Knockturn Alley shop 8 years ago for reasons Remus declined to specify. It wasn't Sirius's, his was a 12-inch walnut that was still in whatever ministry evidence locker had received his personal effects in 1981, but it was something. He left the next morning in Muggle clothes and took the train from Inverness to London. The Ministry of Magic's public entrance was through a red telephone box on a Westminster street, and Sirius had not been through it since 1981, and he stood on the pavement for 30 seconds and felt the particular weight of that fact before he dialed the number. The lift down was exactly as he remembered. The atrium was exactly as he remembered. The gold ceiling, the fountain, new fountain, replacing the one he vaguely remembered from the 70s, a different arrangement of figures, the flow of ministry workers in their robes moving between departments with the purposeful bustle of a large institution confident in its own importance. Nobody looked at him. He was in Muggle clothes. He'd cleaned up as much as Northumberland had allowed. Remus had applied an impeccable tidying charm before he left. and he'd eaten properly for 3 weeks now, and the hollow look of Azkaban was still there but receding. He looked like a man with somewhere to be. He walked to the security desk and said, "I need to file a judicial review submission with the head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement." The security guard, middle-aged, bored, with the expression of a man who had seen everything, looked up. "Name?" "Sirius Black," Sirius said. The guard looked at him. Looked at the sign-in book. Looked back at Sirius. And something in his face went very careful, very still, the way faces go when the brain is catching up with information it wasn't expecting. "Sir, Judicial Review Act, 1962, Section 4, Sirius said, pleasant, unhurried. Grants provisional immunity to any wizard citizen presenting a formal submission in person. I have the submission here." He put the 12 pages on the desk. "I'd like to file it now, please." The guard looked at the papers. At Sirius. At the papers. Sirius waited. The thing about walking into a bureaucracy with the right document was that the document created its own gravity. The guard wasn't going to make the call about what to do with a judicial review filing from an escaped prisoner. That was not a security desk decision, that was several levels up, and the only way to get it several levels up was to process it, and processing it required following the procedure, which started with logging the submission. The guard logged the submission. "Wait here," he said. "Of course," Sirius said. He waited by the fountain and watched the ministry go about its morning and felt the particular quiet of a man who has done everything he can do and is now entirely in the hands of what comes next. The blackthorn wand was in his inner pocket. The 12 pages were filed. Petrus Allgate was in his office in Diagon Alley watching the clock. It took 11 minutes. Amelia Bones came out of the lift with 2 Aurors flanking her at a pace that suggested she had been interrupted in the middle of something and had decided the interruption was worth it. She was a broad, sharp-featured woman in her mid-40s with close-cropped gray hair and the specific quality of attention of someone who had spent 20 years reading situations for their actual content rather than their presentation. She stopped 6 feet from Sirius and looked at him. "You walked in," she said. "I filed a judicial review submission," Sirius said. "Walking in was incidental. You're an escaped prisoner." "I'm a wizard citizen who was convicted at a trial that did not take place," Sirius said, "who has physical evidence demonstrating that the central facts of my conviction were fabricated, who is exercising a legal right to have that evidence formally reviewed." He met her eyes. "I'm not here to fight, Director. I'm here to show you something." Amelia Bones looked at him for a long moment. The 2 Aurors flanked her in the tense readiness of men who were waiting for the word. Sirius stood still and kept his hands visible and let her look, because she was reading him the same way he'd been reading situations for survival, and the best thing he could do was give her something honest to read. "My office," she said. The Aurors moved. Sirius moved with them, not in custody. They weren't touching him, weren't restraining him, but accompanied, which was the important distinction. The judicial review provision was holding. He followed Amelia Bones into the lift and up 3 floors and through the Aura department's anteroom and into an office that looked like a person actually worked in it, parchment stacked in specific meaningful arrangements, 3 half-drunk cups of tea in various stages of abandonment, a board on the wall with names and connections linked by string in the specific way of an active investigation. He looked at the board. His name was on it. His photograph, the Azkaban one, which was not flattering. The network of connections spread from it, and his eyes moved quickly. James, Lily, Peter's name with a question mark beside it that was recent, the ink fresh. "Sit," Amelia said, taking the chair behind her desk. Sirius sat. The Aurors positioned themselves by the door without being asked, which meant they were here to observe, not intervene, which was Amelia's call and was the right one. He put the runic evidence on the desk, Remus's full analysis, 12 pages of notation, the Karn Dirge documentation, the detection slate reconstruction, the forwarding address signature, and arranged it in order and pushed it across. "The submission you already have is the legal argument," he said. "This is the evidence." Amelia picked up the first page and read it. She read the way Remus read, completely, fully, without skimming. She went through the first 3 pages and then went back to page 1 and read them again more slowly, and Sirius sat across from her and watched her face do the things faces do when evidence rearranges what a person knows. There was a sequence to it: first the professional engagement, the assessment of the analysis itself, the question of whether the rune notation was competent. Then, as the competence became clear, the shift to content, what the analysis actually said. Then the particular stillness of a person hitting something they hadn't expected. She put the pages down after the 5th one. Who did the runic analysis? A qualified runologist. I need their name for the record. Remus Lupin, Sirius said. Who will confirm his analysis to anyone you send to him, in whatever setting is required? Lupin, she said. He was part of your school group. He was. He's also the most technically proficient runologist I know, and the analysis will hold up under any independent review. Sirius leaned forward slightly. Director, whatever you think of me, and I understand the case against me was compelling, the evidence in front of you is not about what you think of me. It's about what it says. Look at page 6. She looked at page 6. The relay array documentation. The forwarding address signature, the fragmented, degraded magical signature of the person-bound receiver. He watched her read it. Watched her reach the implication. This signature, she said. The person-bound receiver. Is consistent with a magical signature that was violently disrupted rather than extinguished, Sirius said. Yes. You're saying, I'm saying that someone with what remains of Voldemort's magical signature has been receiving live intelligence on Harry Potter's magical development for 5 years, Sirius said. Through a runic relay in the Scottish Highlands, fed by a parasite rune set placed in a 5-year-old child's magical core. And the person who placed that parasite set is Peter Pettigrew, who is alive and currently in Britain, and whose runic grammar is identifiable from the Liber Runicus errors reproduced in the construction, which Remus can demonstrate to any examiner you send. The office was very quiet. Pettigrew is dead, she said. Pettigrew left a finger in a street, Sirius said. Which was enough to close the case. It wasn't enough to actually confirm a death, and nobody looked hard enough to find the difference, because everyone had already decided what happened. He met her eyes. I did not kill 13 people, Director. Peter Pettigrew killed 12 of them, framed me, and has been hiding as a rat in a wizarding family's home. I suspect the Weasley family, given the geography and the timeline, but that's for your office to confirm, for 5 years. He could see her working through it. Not dismissing it, she was too good for that, too principled, but applying the rigorous skepticism of a professional to a narrative that required significant existing belief to be revised. You were the secret keeper, she said. I was not, Sirius said. James and I switched at the last minute. Peter was the real secret keeper. He was the only one who could give the Potter's location to Voldemort, because he was the only one who knew it. He paused. Ask Dumbledore. He knows. He's known, or suspected, for at least a year. He's been trying to work it out quietly, without the Ministry's involvement, and the rune evidence in front of you is partly his work. The first set, the monitoring structure, that's his. He'll confirm it. You want me to contact Albus Dumbledore, she said. I want you to contact him with the rune analysis in hand, Sirius said, and watch his face when he reads it. Because he's been sitting on this, trying to manage it, and it's been getting away from him. Your involvement changes what's possible. She was quiet for a moment. Then she picked up the pages again and kept reading. She read all 12 pages of the runic evidence. Then she read the 12 pages of the legal submission. Then she set it all down in a neat stack and looked at Sirius with the expression of someone who has arrived at a conclusion they don't entirely like but aren't willing to dismiss. I'm going to need to verify this independently, she said. Of course, Sirius said. I'd expect nothing else. While I do that, you're in custody, she said. Not Azkaban, the Ministry secure facility, with the judicial review provision active, which means no dementors and no trial proceedings until the review is complete. You have Aldgate as counsel, which is noted in your submission and is your right. Yes, Sirius said. If the evidence is verified, when, Sirius said, without heat, without aggression. Just as a factual correction. She looked at him. When the evidence is verified, she said, we pursue Pettigrew. That is my office's operation, not yours. Agreed, Sirius said. On the condition that your office moves immediately. Not in a week. Not after further review. The relay array at Carn Durge is still active. If Pettigrew realizes his cover is blown, he'll run, and if he runs, whatever is left of Voldemort loses his most reliable servant, which is good for everyone, but Pettigrew himself disappears and the case against my conviction disappears with him. Amelia looked at him. You want me to move within 24 hours. I want you to move within 6, Sirius said. Because if I'm not out of this building by 6 o'clock today, Petrus Aldgate sends the full evidence package to the Daily Prophet, and then you're managing it publicly instead of professionally. A pause. You set a deadline, she said. I set a deadline, he agreed. She studied him for a long moment with the focused attention that had presumably made her very good at her job for 20 years. He held her gaze and let himself be read, the same way he'd done in the atrium, because the best argument he had was the truth and the best way to make truth visible was to stop trying to manage its presentation. The Weasley family, she said. You said you suspect Pettigrew is with the Weasley family. The timeline of their youngest children's ages and the geographical proximity to known Death Eater properties in the area, Sirius said. Their family owl might have a companion. A rat. Old, shouldn't be alive as long as he has been, probably given to their eldest son. Amelia Bones picked up her wand and tapped her desk twice. The door opened and one of the Aurors put his head in. Get me Shacklebolt, she said. And Tonks. And get me a flu line to Albus Dumbledore. The Auror's head disappeared. You're in the secure facility while I verify, Amelia said. That's not negotiable. Fine, Sirius said. But I need to send an owl first. 2. My godson, Sirius said. He's 5 years old and he's waiting to hear from me. Something shifted in Amelia Bones's expression, not softness, exactly, but a recalibration. She was a woman who'd made her career on facts rather than sentiment, and the fact of a 5-year-old waiting for word was a fact like any other, and she was the kind of person who responded to facts. One owl, she said. Supervised. One owl, Sirius said. The message he sent was 3 words, walking out tonight. Harry's response arrived 2 hours later, which meant Remus had conjured a relay somehow and Harry had written it himself, the letters large and careful and a little uneven at the ends because the pen had caught on the parchment texture. We'll have dinner ready. Sirius read it in the Ministry's secure facility and felt something so large move through him that he had to sit very still for a moment until it finished. By 5:30, Shacklebolt had confirmed the relay array at Carn Durge. By 5:45, Dumbledore had confirmed the runic evidence via Flu in terms that were, Amelia reported to Sirius in the secure facility, the closest thing to an admission she had ever heard from the headmaster. By 5:50, the Auror team dispatched to the Burrow had reported back. They'd found the rat. Sirius walked out of the Ministry at 5:58, with Amelia Bones's provisional release paperwork in one hand and Petrus Aldgate on his left, into the late October evening of London, 2 minutes before his deadline, into the cold air and the noise and the solid ordinary reality of a city that had kept moving while he was inside. He stood on the pavement and breathed. Then he found a telephone box and called the number Remus had left for the pub at Kinlochbeg, and when Remus answered he said, "Tell Harry dinner sounds good. Tell him I'm on my way home." Home, Remus said, and there was something in the word. Figure of speech, Sirius said. No it isn't, Remus said, quietly, and rang off. Sirius stood in the telephone box for a moment longer. Then he stepped out into the evening and hailed a taxi and pointed it toward the train station and let himself, for the first time in 4 years, make plans that extended more than a week into the future. Chapter 5. Peter the Rat was in a cage on Amelia Bones's desk when Sirius arrived back at the ministry 3 days later. Not invited, summoned, with the specific courtesy that powerful people use when they're summoning someone they need but haven't yet decided how much authority to grant. Sirius came anyway, with Petrus Allgate at his shoulder and Remus's full rune analysis in a leather folder, and walked through the ministry atrium with the particular posture of a man who had already decided the building belonged to him and was allowing its current occupants to continue using it out of generosity. The Rat sat in a ministry-issue wire cage on the corner of Amelia's desk and looked at absolutely nothing with the fixed blankness of a creature that had made a calculation about what it was safe to appear to know. Sirius looked at it. The Rat looked at nothing. "We have a problem," Amelia said, without preamble, which was one of the things Sirius had already decided he respected about her. She was seated behind her desk with Shacklebolt standing to her left, and she had the expression of a woman who had spent 3 days verifying evidence and had verified everything and was now dealing with the secondary consequences of the truth being what it was. "The Rat," Sirius said. "The Rat," Amelia confirmed. "Which we took from the Weasley family, specifically from their son Ronald, who is 4 years old and has had this animal since he was 2, which makes him too young to know anything meaningful and his parents too normal in every other respect to be complicit." She paused. "The Rat is a rat. Our animal identification team has confirmed it as a male Animagus currently in transformation, which is not a transfiguration because the magical signature is wrong for externally applied transfiguration, and is consistent with a voluntarily sustained Animagus form." "But it won't transform," Sirius said. "It won't transform," Amelia agreed. "We've tried the standard coercive reversals, 2 of them, and the transformation hasn't completed. The animal appears to be resisting. Peter was always stubborn about things that mattered to his survival," Sirius said. "He'll maintain the form until he passes out from the effort, and then maintain it through unconsciousness on pure instinct, and only transform if the alternative is worse." "What would constitute worse?" Sirius looked at the Rat. The Rat continued looking at nothing. "Let me in the room with it," he said. "Alone?" "Not a chance," Amelia said. "Then with you and Shacklebolt present and not interfering," Sirius said. "I'm not going to hurt it. I'm going to remind it of something it's had 4 years to forget." Amelia looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at the cage. Then she moved the cage to the center of the desk and sat back and said, 3 minutes. Sirius walked to the desk and crouched down so he was at eye level with the cage. The Rat was pressed into the far corner, small and gray and trembling at a frequency below what should be visible, and it still wasn't looking at him, which was its own answer. "Pete," Sirius said. The Rat flinched. "I know you can hear me," Sirius said. "I know you understood every word in the atrium. I know you've understood every word in every room you've been in for 5 years, because that's what it means to be what we are. You can pretend to be a rat but you can't make yourself stop understanding. That's the part that never turns off." He paused. 12 years we were friends. That's not nothing. I'm not going to pretend I'm not furious with you, because I am, and you know what I am when I'm furious so you know I mean it. But I'm also here to tell you that the evidence is already in. The rune analysis is verified. The relay array has been confirmed. There is no version of this where staying as a rat makes the outcome better for you. The only thing staying as a rat does is make everything worse and slower. The Rat hadn't moved. "James is dead," Sirius said, very quietly. "Lily is dead. I spent 4 years in Azkaban. Harry has been sleeping in a cupboard under some Muggle family's stairs since he was 15 months old, and for the entirety of that time there were surveillance runes in his magical core reporting his power levels to something that used to be Voldemort." He paused. "The runes were yours, Peter. Your work. Your grammar. Your Liber Runicus errors, reproduced faithfully in a 5-year-old's core." He let that sit for a moment. "I think you know what that means for how this ends." The only question is whether you're present and coherent for it or whether they have to wait for you to pass out and wake you up for the trial. The rat looked at him. Actually looked at him, the blank animal gaze dropped, the pretense failed, and what looked back at Sirius from behind the small grey face was a person, terrified and cornered and utterly without options, and Sirius had known that person for 12 years and the knowing of it was the worst part of this moment, the specific grief of a betrayal that had had a face. The transformation took 40 seconds. Peter Pettigrew was small and pale and going to seed in the way of a man whose late 30s had not been kind to him, which was perhaps the least of his problems. He was wearing something, whatever remained of his clothing from whenever he'd last transformed, rags and a torn sleeve and the general impression of someone who had not chosen his current circumstances. He was crouched in the corner where the rat had been, which was too small for a man, and he was shaking visibly, and he was looking at Sirius with the expression of a man who has run every scenario and found that all roads lead to the same room. "Sirius," he said, and his voice came out rusty, years unused. "Don't," Sirius said. "Not unkind. Not exactly. But final. Not right now. Right now you just have to be here and let these people do what they need to do, and we'll do the rest later." Peter looked at him for a moment longer. Then he looked at Amelia Bones, who had not moved from her chair but whose expression had gone through several distinct phases during the transformation and had settled on something that looked like the professional satisfaction of a case resolving in a direction that justified the work. "Peter Pettigrew," she said. "You are in the custody of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. You have the right to legal representation. You are advised that anything you say will be recorded by Ministry Quill." She paused. "Shacklebolt." Shacklebolt produced wrist restraints and moved to Peter with the practiced efficiency of a man who had done this many times, and Peter submitted to it without resistance, which was the one thing he could still control, the manner of his submission, and he chose compliance, which was also consistent with 12 years of knowing him. Peter had always picked the side that looked like it was going to win. Sirius stepped back from the desk. "The trial," Amelia said to him. "I want you there." "Obviously," Sirius said. "With Lupin. His rune testimony is the spine of the case. He'll be there." "And the boy," Amelia said. She said it carefully, watching Sirius's face. "Harry Potter. At some point in this proceeding, the question of his circumstances will come up, the runes, the Dursley placement, the conditions of his custody. That is not my department's area. That goes to the Wisengamot, and the Wisengamot will want to speak to him." "He's 5, Sirius said. "I'm aware," Amelia said. "But he's also the central subject of the largest evidence set in this case. His magical core is the only surviving record of the rune placement. We can't remove them before the trial, we need them in situ for the examination." She met Sirius's eyes. "I'm not treating him as evidence. I'm telling you he's going to be in the room and I want you to be prepared for that." Sirius held her gaze. "He'll need to be prepared for it too," he said. "That," Amelia said, "is your department." He went back to Kinlochbeg. Not directly. He stopped in London long enough to collect several things that had been arranged during the 3-day wait, clothing, proper this time, a bag, a wand from Ollivanders who had looked at Sirius across the counter with the particular expression of a wand maker who remembers every wand he's ever sold and said nothing beyond a walnut is in ministry custody, I'm afraid, and then spent 20 minutes finding Sirius a new one. 11 inches, you, dragon heartstring, with a kick like a beater's bat when he first tested it in the back of the shop and a warmth that said yes in a way that settled the last of the Azkaban rawness in his hands. He arrived back at the pub in Kinlochbeg by early evening, and Harry met him at the door. Not because Harry had been waiting at the door, because Harry had heard Padfoot on the road before Sirius had transformed back, and had come out to the step, and was standing on it now in the cold with his hands in his pockets and his hair doing its usual catastrophe and his face doing the thing where it was very carefully not showing how much he'd been waiting. Sirius transformed on the road and walked up to the door, and Harry looked at him with those green eyes. "You've got a new wand," Harry said. "I do," Sirius said. "And proper clothes." "Also yes." And you look less like you haven't slept, Harry said. I slept in the Ministry's secure facility, Sirius said. Which is exactly as luxurious as it sounds. Harry stepped back from the door to let him in. Remus made soup, he said. He makes soup when he's worried. We've had soup for 3 days. How much soup? So much soup, Harry said, with feeling. They went inside, and the pub room was warm with the particular warmth of a place that had been lived in for several weeks and had started to feel like something, and Remus looked up from the table where he had been doing what appeared to be advanced runic mathematics and said, Pettigrew, without preamble because Remus's way of expressing relief was to immediately move to the next problem. In Ministry custody, Sirius said. Transformed. Talking, last I heard, which apparently he started doing the moment Shacklebolt got him in the interrogation room and hasn't stopped since. He sat down. He accepted the bowl of soup that appeared in front of him without comment on the quantity. Trial is in 2 weeks. Amelia wants us both there, you for the rune testimony, me for the witness account. And Harry, Remus said, watching him. And Harry, Sirius confirmed. Harry, who had sat down across from him and was eating his own soup with the focused attention of a child who had decided that food was worth paying attention to, said, I know. I heard you tell Remus on the flu. Sirius looked at him. When? Last night, Harry said serenely. You called after we were supposed to be asleep. You were supposed to be asleep. I was mostly asleep, Harry said. The important parts got through. Sirius looked at Remus, who had the expression of a man who had been managing this particular aspect of Harry's character for 3 weeks and had developed a very sophisticated appreciation for choosing his words carefully near the boy. The Wizengamot is going to want to meet you, Sirius said. That's formal and official and involves a lot of old people in robes asking you questions. About the runes, Harry said. About the runes, and about where you've been living, and about what's been done to you, Sirius said. The latter 2 categories are going to feel invasive. People are going to treat you like a problem to be managed rather than a person. I want you to know that going in. Harry looked at him steadily. What do I do when they do that? Answer what's asked and nothing more, Sirius said. Don't perform distress for their benefit. Don't simplify yourself. And if anyone, including people in authority, including the chief warlock himself, says something you know to be factually incorrect, you correct it. Even if they don't like being corrected? Especially then, Sirius said. Harry nodded, processing. Will you be there? Every second, Sirius said. Remus too. Then it's fine, Harry said, with the flat certainty he brought to things he decided were true, and went back to his soup. Sirius looked at Remus over Harry's head. Remus was doing the thing where he wasn't letting his expression do what it wanted to do, which was apparently a habit he'd developed specifically in response to Harry. He met Sirius's eyes and tilted his head very slightly in the direction of outside, which meant later, which meant there were things to say that were not for Harry's immediate hearing. They said them after Harry was asleep, sitting outside the pub on an upturned crate each with the cold Northumberland night around them. He's ready, Remus said. For the Wizengamot, I mean. He'll be fine. I know, Sirius said. I'm not worried about the Wizengamot. I'm worried about what comes after. Custody, Remus said. Custody, Sirius confirmed. My name isn't cleared yet, not officially, not until after the trial. Until it is, I don't have standing to petition for guardianship. And even after, the Wizengamot has to approve it, and the Wizengamot is going to have opinions about a man who spent 4 years in Azkaban, taking custody of the most famous child in the wizarding world, Remus said. Yes. I've been thinking about that, Remus said. About what we're asking them to weigh. On one side, Sirius Black, formally exonerated, presumably, biological godfather, demonstrably competent to manage Harry's care given the evidence of the last 3 weeks. He paused. On the other side, the Dursleys, who put him in a cupboard. The comparison is not complicated. The Wisengamot will make it complicated, Sirius said. Then we make it simple again, Remus said. We bring Harry in. They look at him. They look at the report from the Ministry Medical Examiner, which I've already requested, which will document the malnourishment and the lack of appropriate accommodation and the magical suppression of a child with a core that size. He paused. And then we let the comparison sit there until someone admits what it means. Sirius turned that over. You requested the medical examiner. 3 days ago, Remus said. When you were in the ministry. I may have been building a case while you were doing your part. Mooney, Sirius said. I had time, Remus said. Also soup. Sirius laughed. Not the short surprised laugh of the early days in Alnwick but a full one, sustained, the kind that required lung capacity and wasn't rationed. Remus smiled at the cold ground and let it happen, which was very Remus. He never laughed at his own jokes, just waited for confirmation that they'd landed. We need to work on the magic, Sirius said, when the laugh had finished. Before the trial. Not for the Wisengamot, for Harry. The runes have to stay in until the examination, but they're going to run that examination whether he's been taught to manage his core or not, and a 5-year-old's core under examination pressure without preparation, reacts, Remus said. Yes. I've been thinking the same thing. He tilted his head back and looked at the stars. He's going to need to hold himself still. Not suppress the magic, he can't, not with the runes amplifying every spike. But hold it even. Keep it from peaking under stress. Can he do that? He did it at Carn Dirge, Remus said. When I ran the detection pulse. He held his own core stable for 40 seconds while foreign runic energy moved through it. That's not nothing. He paused. The problem is the Wisengamot chamber. The emotional conditions are different. Examining the runes in a room full of people looking at you, is not the same as sitting in a ruin in Scotland with people you trust, Sirius said. No, Remus said. We need to practice the emotional component. How do you practice being looked at by 40 strangers who think your life is an administrative problem? Sirius said. Remus thought about it. You practice caring less about the strangers than about the thing you're holding on to, he said finally. What's Harry going to hold on to? They were both quiet for a moment, looking at the dark. Us, Remus said. We're in the room. Then that's what we tell him, Sirius said. Find us in the room and hold on to that. They worked for 8 days. The magic training in the mornings went to a different level now, not broader, but deeper. Remus stopped expanding the scope of the exercises and started going under them, working Harry through the structural basis of what he'd already learned, explaining the theory behind the instincts, giving the wordless things words so Harry could revisit them deliberately rather than just when the feeling was available. Harry found the theory less interesting than the practice but recognized its utility with the pragmatism that characterized most of his learning, and absorbed it with the same focused completeness. In the afternoons, Sirius took over. The afternoon sessions were not lessons in the formal sense. They were more like an ongoing conversation that involved a lot of moving around. They walked the hills above Kinlochbeg, Sirius and Harry and Padfoot alternating as the terrain and the conversation required. Sometimes Sirius talked and Harry listened, sometimes it went the other direction, and sometimes both of them were quiet and the walking was the point. He told Harry what the Wisengamot was. Not a sanitized version, not a child-appropriate version, the actual thing, an ancient body of wizarding law and custom that had enormous power and variable wisdom and which had, in Sirius's case, spectacularly failed to do its job. He told Harry what would be asked and roughly how. He told Harry about the rune examination, a ministry runologist reading the structure in his core directly, similar to what Sirius had done in Alnwick but more formal, longer, with the results being recorded and read aloud. Does it hurt? Harry said, on the 4th day, from the top of a hill where they'd stopped because the view warranted stopping. No, Sirius said. It'll feel strange. Someone in your core who isn't me, who you haven't chosen. That's uncomfortable. But you know what that feeling is now, you've felt the runes themselves, you've felt the detection pulse. This is the same register of sensation. Harry looked out at the hills. What do they do with the reading? They enter it as evidence. The structure of the runes, the layering, the two sets, the forwarding address, it goes on record as the specific conditions of what was done to you. That's the thing that undoes my conviction, because Peter's work being in your core places him at the scene and alive. And it's also the thing that means what was done to you can't be undone without being officially seen first. Seen, Harry repeated. He said it with a particular quality, like someone checking the weight of a word. Seen, Sirius confirmed. Not managed. Not handled. Actually looked at by the people who have the authority to respond to what it says. Harry was quiet for a moment. Is that why you walked into the ministry? Not just for the legal argument. But to make them see. Yes, Sirius said. Because if they see it they have to respond to it, Harry said. And if they have to respond to it they can't pretend it didn't happen. Exactly, Sirius said. Institutions are very good at pretending things didn't happen. What they're bad at is pretending things didn't happen after those things have been formally entered into the record. Harry looked at him. You're teaching me how institutions work. I'm telling you what I know, Sirius said. Because you're going to spend your life interacting with them, and the sooner you understand their specific failure modes, the better equipped you are. Most people don't tell 5-year-olds about institutional failure modes, Harry said. Most 5-year-olds haven't had 61 runes placed in their magical core, Sirius said. We're operating in unusual circumstances. Harry turned that over. Then he looked back at the view and said, tell me about the Wizengamot. What's the worst it can look like? So Sirius told him. Not to frighten him, but because Harry's question was a request for the real version, the complete picture, and Sirius had made a decision in a pub room in Alnwick weeks ago that Harry got the real version of things. He described the worst-case scenario, the Wizengamot deciding that the custody question superseded the evidence question, trying to place Harry back with the Dursleys or with another ministry-selected guardian while the trial proceeded. He described the middle case, provisional custody with Sirius, pending full exoneration. And he described the best case. What's the best case? Harry said. The evidence is so overwhelming and the Wizengamot is so thoroughly embarrassed by what it implies that they clear my name in the same session, grant custody on the spot, and spend the next several years pretending the whole cupboard situation never happened, Sirius said. Which is most likely? Harry said. The middle case, Sirius said. But I'm working toward the best. Good, Harry said. So am I. On the 7th day, something happened that wasn't in the curriculum. Harry was practicing the emotional stability work, holding his core even against a manufactured stressor, which Remus had been providing through a carefully structured pressure exercise, and Sirius was watching from across the room when the rune structure in Harry's core did something it hadn't done before. He felt it before he saw it, a change in the quality of the ambient magic in the room, a shift in register, like a bass note entering a piece of music that had previously only had treble. Harry's eyes opened. He looked at his hands. That was different, he said. What did it feel like? Remus said immediately, already reaching for his analysis tools. Like the runes got louder, Harry said. But not because I was feeling something. I wasn't, I was doing the even hold. They amplified on their own. Sirius crossed the room. They queried you, he said. The implication arrived fully formed and landed badly. Someone sent a query pulse through the second rune set. Like what Dumbledore did, but through Peter's network. Dumbledore is in ministry custody, Remus said, already running the analysis. The query didn't come through the first set. He looked at the slate. His expression changed. It came through the forwarding address. The person-bound receiver. Something that was Voldemort queried Harry directly, Sirius said. The room was very quiet. He knows, Remus said. That Peter's been taken. The relay at Carn Dirge, when the ministry confirmed it, they didn't disable it, they left it active as evidence. The query came from the person-bound receiver through the relay, checking whether the transmission was still live. He looked up. He knows Peter is compromised and he's checking whether Harry's signal is still available. And the signal answered, Harry said. He was looking at his hands still, very still, the way he went still when he was feeling something large and deciding what to do with it. Because the runes are still in me. He knows I'm here. He knows you exist and that your core is broadcasting, Sirius said. He doesn't know where you are. The anchor tile is still running. For 2 more days, Remus said. And then the anchor degrades and the actual signal resumes. Pull the anchor now, Harry said. They both looked at him. If the anchor tile is still running, the signal it's sending is wrong, it's the Surrey signal, Harry said. If he sent a query, he compared what came back against what he expected. The Surrey signal is what he'd expect from the anchor. Which means he knows the anchor is still running and thinks everything is normal. He paused. But in 2 days the anchor degrades and the real signal comes back, which reads as Scotland. That's a jump from Surrey to Scotland with no interim movement, which will tell him something changed. So we either remove the anchor now and give him a gradual drift that reads as natural movement, Remus said slowly, or we extend the anchor, or, Harry said, we remove the runes. Sirius looked at him. The trial is in 4 days, Harry said. You said the runes need to be in place for the examination. But if we remove them now, the Wisengamot examiner can read the removal scar. The structure leaves a trace even after removal. Remus said so. Remus had said so. In passing, 2 weeks ago, a technical aside during a lesson. Sirius hadn't fully registered it. Harry had, of course, filed it immediately. The removal scar would be admissible, Remus said, working through it quickly. Less clear than the in situ reading, but admissible. And I've documented the full structure already, my analysis stands regardless of whether the runes are still active. So the question is whether the in situ reading is necessary for the conviction, Sirius said, or whether Remus's documentation is sufficient. For Peter's conviction, the documentation is sufficient, Remus said. For the full scope of the case, demonstrating that the secondary recipient is active, is a person-bound receiver consistent with a surviving Voldemort fragment, the in situ reading adds significantly to that argument. But if Voldemort knows the runes are going dark in 2 days and moves against Harry, Sirius said. Then the argument is moot, Harry said. They looked at each other, the 3 of them, in the small room in Kinlochbeg with the wind working at the windows and 4 days between them and a Wisengamot hearing. Remove them, Harry said. Tonight. Do it properly. Use the documentation for the trial, it's enough for the conviction. And when I walk into that chamber I walk in clean. Harry, Sirius started. I have been broadcasting to him my whole life, Harry said. The flatness in his voice was not anger. It was something more fundamental, the statement of a fact whose time for being a fact had expired. Every time I was scared in that cupboard. Every time I did accidental magic. Every spike in my core for 5 years. He's been reading all of it, whatever's left of him, feeling it, tracking it. He looked at Sirius directly. I want it out. Tonight. And then when I walk into the Wisengamot I'm not a signal anymore. I'm just me. Sirius held his godson's gaze for a long moment. The green eyes didn't waver. There was no performance in them, no dramatic resolution, just the clean clarity of a decision that had been made and was waiting for the practical work to follow. Tonight, Sirius said. Remus? Remus was already reaching for his tools. 2 hours to prepare the removal framework, he said. It's not a simple working. 61 simultaneous extractions from an active core, I need to sequence the removal so the core isn't destabilized. Harry, I'll explain each step as we go. You stop me any time something feels wrong. I know, Harry said. He got up and moved the table to the side to make room and sat in the center of the cleared space with his hands in his lap and his eyes on Remus, and there was something in the way he held himself, open, ready, not braced against what was coming but settled into it, that made Sirius think of something he'd seen once in James, in the worst moments, when James stopped being afraid of what was coming and just became the person who was going to walk into it. Remus built the removal framework over 2 hours, working with a precision that was visibly costing him concentration, the runic notation filling 3 sheets of fresh parchment in his immaculate hand. He explained each element as he worked, his voice low and even, and Harry listened and asked 2 questions, both technical, both indicating that he understood what he was hearing in more depth than Remus had explained it. When it was ready, Sirius sat across from Harry in the circle and Remus positioned himself to the side, the framework active and oriented, his wand held loosely. The room was very still. "Ready?" Sirius said. "Yes," Harry said. "I'm going to be in your core the whole time," Sirius said. "You'll feel me there. I won't do anything, I'm just there. As something familiar." "Okay," Harry said. He closed his eyes. Did the clearing. His magic settled into its natural rhythm, enormous and patient, and Sirius reached in and was present, just that, a known thing in the cathedral space of his godson's core. Remus began the removal. It was not fast. 61 runes, sequenced carefully, each extraction a precise pull on a specific thread of the inlaid structure, and Sirius felt each one from the inside, the distinct sensation of something that had been there since before Harry could speak being cleanly, carefully drawn out and away. Harry made no sound. He held himself still with a completeness that was not suppression but mastery, the same technical holding he'd been practicing for days, applied now to something that was also visceral and personal and years deep. The 41st rune was one of the reporting ones. When Remus pulled it, Sirius felt the cessation of its transmission like a door closing, a door that had been open for 5 years, reading and sending, and was now shut. He felt Harry feel it too, the sudden silence in a place that had been loud so long the loudness had become the baseline. Harry exhaled. Just once. Then held himself still again. By the 61st rune, the framework was complete, and Remus sat back and set down his wand and pressed both hands to his face for a moment, the exhaustion of sustained precision work releasing all at once. Sirius withdrew from Harry's core slowly, letting the contact fade the way light fades, not abruptly. Harry opened his eyes. He looked at his hands. The ambient magic in the room had changed completely, the layered, complex quality of the rune structure replaced by something that was purely Harry, which was like the difference between hearing a piece of music through walls and standing in the concert hall. Raw and enormous and quietly alive and entirely, completely his. "Oh," Harry said softly. "What does it feel like?" Sirius said. Harry thought about it for a moment. "Clean," he said. "Like when you've been carrying something for a long time and you put it down and the first second after is almost louder than the carrying was." Sirius looked at Remus. Remus was looking at Harry with the expression he wore when he was feeling something he didn't have adequate language for. He picked up his wand and ran a brief confirmatory sweep, and what the sweep returned made him close his eyes for a second and reopen them. "Done," he said simply. "Completely clear." Harry looked up. "What does his receiver show now?" "Nothing," Remus said. "The signal is gone." From his end it would read as Harry's core going dark, like the monitoring ended, or the subject died, or disappeared, Harry said. "Disappeared," Remus confirmed. Harry nodded slowly, taking that in. Then he looked at Sirius and said, "For days." "For days," Sirius said. "Then let's not waste them," Harry said, and stood up and stretched and went to bed, and Sirius and Remus sat in the cleared room with the removal framework and the 61 notations on Remus's parchment and the particular silence of people who have just done something irreversible and correct. "He's going to be extraordinary," Remus said. "He already is," Sirius said. "I mean later," Remus said. "When he's grown. When all of this is," he gestured vaguely at everything. When it's sorted and he's been trained and he's had the childhood he should have had. What he is now, at 5, carrying all of this, he stopped. He's going to be terrifying. Good, Sirius said. People should be terrified of the right things. Remus looked at him. Peter is in ministry custody. The trial is in 4 days. What do you want to happen after? After the trial, Sirius said, I want a house. A real one, not Grimmauld Place. I'm not living in my mother's monument to misery. Somewhere with a garden, somewhere Harry can practice outside without worrying about it. I want you in it. Not as a guest, properly in it, as part of it. He paused. And I want to send Dumbledore a very detailed letter about what he did wrong, and then have a meeting about what comes next, because whatever Voldemort is now, he's not gone, and that conversation needs to happen with all the right people present and nobody managing the information flow. You want to run the strategy, Remus said. I want to be in the room where the strategy is made, Sirius said. Not outside it, not informed after the fact, not having the relevant information distributed on a need-to-know basis that never seems to include me. In the room. He looked at the dark window. Harry's name is in a prophecy, presumably, I don't know the details, but the shape of everything suggests it. He's going to be in the middle of whatever comes next whether we like it or not. The least we can do is make sure we're in the middle of it with him, with all the information, making actual decisions. Remus was quiet for a moment. He'd prefer that, he said. Harry. He'd prefer to know. I know, Sirius said. That's why we're going to tell him. He's 5, Remus said. He's 5, Sirius agreed. And in 4 days he's going to stand in front of the Wizengamot and let them examine his magical core and answer their questions, and he's going to do it with complete clarity because we told him what to expect and why and treated him like someone whose understanding of his own life was relevant. He turned to look at Remus. We keep doing that. All the way through. Whatever his age. Remus looked at the parchment with 61 removal notations and nodded slowly. All the way through, he agreed. Outside, Kinloch Beg settled into the deep quiet of the rural night, and the hills above the village stood in the darkness without anything moving on them, and in the northwest the ruins at Carn Durge sat with their relay array still carved into the ancient stone, now broadcasting silence to a fragmented, waiting darkness that had been tracking a child for 5 years and had just lost the signal. And in a small room on the top floor of a small pub in a very small village, Harry Potter slept without runes, for the first time in his life, with nothing in his core but himself. Chapter 6. What was owed the Wizengamot chamber smelled like old wood and older arguments. Sirius had been in it twice before, once as a child, brought by his mother to observe proceedings in some dispute about an estate boundary that had bored him so thoroughly he'd spent the entire session trying to transfigure the bench beneath him without a wand, and once as himself, standing in the dock at 21 years old without a trial being formally convened, watching the people in the tiered seats above him decide his life in the time it took to eat a sandwich. He'd promised himself, in the years after, that if he ever came back to this room it would be on his own terms. He was on his own terms. The chamber was arranged in its traditional semicircle, the tiered seating rising in arcs above the central floor where the witness stand and the table for legal counsel sat under the domed ceiling's cold light. The public gallery above was full. Word had gotten out, not through Sirius's doing but through the ministry's inability to keep anything actually quiet when it involved a name like Potter or Black, and the gallery was shoulder to shoulder with witches and wizards who had come to watch history being revised. Sirius didn't look at the gallery. He sat at the council table with Petrus Aldgate to his right and Remus to his left, and he looked at the tiered seats filling with Wizengamot members in their plum robes and he felt the room the way he'd learned to feel rooms, exits, positioning, where the authority was concentrated, where the uncertainty was, who was going to be the problem. He'd been doing it since Azkaban, this specific reading of spaces, and the Wizengamot chamber was not a difficult read. The authority was distributed unevenly across the tiered seats, concentrated most heavily in the center row where the senior members sat, and the uncertainty was almost everywhere else. Harry was in the anteroom. Sirius had not wanted Harry in the anteroom, he'd wanted him at the table, present from the start, refusing to be managed by being placed out of sight until summoned. But Aldgate had advised that the standard procedure for child witnesses was the anteroom, and departing from standard procedure before the proceedings even began would give the Wisengamot grounds to establish the hearing's terms before Sirius could, which was not what he wanted. So Harry was in the anteroom with a ministry-appointed child welfare officer who was doing her level best to make conversation with a 5-year-old who was reading her in real time and finding her, by his expression when Sirius had left him, both well-meaning and somewhat underestimating of her audience. Sirius had told him, 1 hour, maybe 2. Then they'll bring you in. Find me in the room. Harry had said, I know. Go. The chief warlock called the session to order. Sirius didn't know him, a Wilmington, appointed after his predecessor retired, with the look of a career politician who had learned to read rooms for consensus rather than truth. That was manageable. What was less manageable was the presence of Cornelius Fudge in the minister's seat to the left of the proceedings, Fudge, who had taken the ministry job 6 months ago and who Sirius had met exactly once, in 1981, briefly, when Fudge had been a junior minister and Sirius had been a young orar, and Fudge had looked at him with the particular expression of a man who found confidence in others personally threatening. Fudge looked at him the same way now. That was also manageable. Sirius had dealt with people who found him threatening by existing. It was not a new problem. The charges were read. The trial record from 1981 was entered, the formal documentation of proceedings that had consisted of a brief informal hearing and a declaration rather than a trial, which, when read aloud by the court recorder, sounded exactly as procedurally catastrophic as it had actually been. Sirius watched several Wisengamot members' expressions shift during the reading in ways that suggested this was the first time some of them were hearing the actual sequence of events rather than the assumed version. Good. Petrus rose and entered the first evidence set, Remus's complete runic analysis, translated into formal legal language and bound in ministry standard parchment, 42 pages documenting the structure, placement, and authorship of 61 runes in a child's magical core. He entered the Karn Dirge documentation. He entered the relay array analysis. He entered the fragmented magical signature of the person-bound receiver. Then he entered Peter Pettigrew's confession. Peter had talked. Sirius had known he would, had calculated it, had built the entire approach to the ministry around the fact that Peter, when genuinely cornered with no remaining calculation to make, defaulted to whatever preserved the most of what was left. The confession was detailed, verified under veritaserum, and covered his recruitment as a Death Eater in his final year at school, the deliberate cultivation of Sirius's trust throughout the war, the switch of Secret Keeper, the deliberate framing of Sirius at the scene, 5 years of hiding as a rat in the Weasley household, the placement of surveillance runes in Harry Potter's magical core at the moment of Albus Dumbledore's initial ward setting in November 1981, and the forwarding of Harry's magical data through the Karn Dirge relay to a person-bound receiver he described as the remains of the Dark Lord, which he'd last confirmed as operational approximately 3 weeks ago. The chamber was very quiet during the reading of the confession. Fudge was not quiet. He leaned to the Chief Warlock twice during the reading, and both times the Chief Warlock listened and both times he did nothing with what Fudge had said, which suggested the Chief Warlock at least had the political intelligence to understand that this was not a moment for interference management. When Petrus finished the evidence presentation, the Chief Warlock opened the floor for questioning, and what followed was 90 minutes of Sirius and Remus answering questions from the Wisengamot members with the particular precision of 2 people who had spent 3 weeks making sure every answer was available and accurate. The runic questions went to Remus, who answered them in the way he answered everything difficult, completely, accessibly, without condescension and without simplification, finding the exact level of explanation that informed without overwhelming. 3 members of the Wisengamot who had runic backgrounds asked follow-up questions that were genuinely technical and which Remus answered in kind, and the dynamic that emerged from those exchanges was the dynamic Sirius had been hoping for. The rune evidence stopped being Sirius Black's claim and became the subject of expert discussion between people with relevant knowledge, which is a different and considerably more durable thing. Sirius answered the factual questions about 1981, the Secret Keeper switch, the night in the street, the finger, the arrest. He answered them with the same directness he'd been practicing for 3 weeks in a pub room in Northumberland. He did not perform outrage. He did not ask for sympathy. He stated what had happened in the order it had happened, and the sequence spoke for itself, and the sequence was damning not primarily of Peter. Peter's role was already documented, but of the process that had looked at the scene and asked no further questions. Fudge, when the floor was eventually opened for the minister's office to respond, said that the evidence was compelling but that the question of Lord Voldemort's continued existence in any form was a matter requiring extremely careful verification before the ministry could. The minister, Sirius said, addressing the chief warlock directly, is welcome to verify the fragmented magical signature in his own time. The rune evidence requires no verification of Voldemort's specific status to establish the facts of my case. What the evidence establishes is that Peter Pettigrew placed surveillance runes in a child's core in 1981, that Peter Pettigrew has been alive since 1981, that Peter Pettigrew was in Britain for that entire period, and that Peter Pettigrew was the secret keeper for the Fidelius charm protecting James and Lily Potter. The minister's concerns about the nature of the receiving end of those runes are, with respect, a separate matter. Several Wisengamot members looked at each other. Fudge's expression moved through several phases, none of them comfortable. The legal argument, Petrus said, rising smoothly, is straightforward. The conviction of Sirius Black in November 1981 was predicated on 2 assumptions: first, that he was the secret keeper for the Potter Fidelius, and second, that he killed 12 Muggles and Peter Pettigrew in the street confrontation following the Potters' deaths. Both assumptions are now demonstrably false. The first is refuted by Pettigrew's Veritaserum verified confession. The second is refuted by Pettigrew's continued existence and his own account of the street confrontation. There is no remaining factual basis for the conviction. He paused. The Aldgate submission requests formal exoneration, full expungement of the Azkaban record, restoration of citizenship and property rights, and compensation under the wrongful imprisonment provision of 1948. The chief warlock looked at the evidence before him. He looked at Fudge. He looked at the 42 pages of runic analysis and the Veritaserum confession and the 2 men at the council table who had spent 90 minutes demonstrating that the case was exactly as solid as it appeared. The chamber will recess for deliberation, he said. The recess lasted 40 minutes. Sirius sat at the council table and did not move, because moving would look like nerves, and he was not experiencing nerves exactly, he was experiencing the specific alert stillness of a man who has played every available card and is waiting for the table to show its hand. Petrus went over something in his notes. Remus read. Harry was still in the anteroom, and Sirius was tracking the time with the part of his brain that did that automatically now, the part that had been tracking Harry's whereabouts and status since Little Whinging, and he knew that an hour and 20 minutes had passed and Harry would have read the child welfare officer's character completely by now and was probably doing something with the information. The Wisengamot returned. The chief warlock's statement was formal and took longer than its content required, in the way of official bodies that need the apparatus of process to carry decisions that are in themselves straightforward. The verdict of the 1981 proceedings was declared void on the grounds of procedural failure, no formal charges, no legal counsel, no Veritaserum examination, no witness testimony, and the conviction was expunged. Sirius Black was formally exonerated of all charges. The Azkaban record was to be removed. Citizenship and property rights were restored effective immediately. The compensation matter would be handled by the Office of Judicial Affairs within 90 days. Fudge did not look pleased. Sirius did not look at Fudge. He looked at the chief warlock and nodded once, in acknowledgement of a decision that was right and late and insufficient and necessary, and then he looked at Remus and Remus looked back and neither of them said anything because there was nothing adequate to say in this room. The matter of Harry Potter, the chief warlock said. This was the part that mattered more. The child welfare section of the ministry had submitted a report, the one Remus had initiated from Kinlochbeg, and it had arrived in the Wisengamot's hands that morning. Sirius knew what it said because Petrus had obtained a copy. It said that Harry Potter had been placed by Albus Dumbledore in the care of his maternal aunt and her husband in November 1981 without formal guardianship documentation, without ministry notification, without any process of assessment of the placement's suitability, and that the subsequent conditions of that placement included inappropriate accommodation, food deprivation, clothing inadequacy, and a pattern of responses to Harry's accidental magic that constituted magical suppression of a child's core development. Dumbledore was in the chamber. He had come at the Chief Warlock's request, and he sat in the witness section with his hands folded on his lap and his expression containing the particular quality of a man who is engaged in real-time moral accounting. He looked older than Sirius remembered. Not physically, Dumbledore was ancient by any measure and looked the same ancient, but in the way of someone who had been carrying a weight and had recently had its full dimensions made clear. Sirius would deal with Dumbledore. That conversation was scheduled for after the proceedings, at Dumbledore's specific request, which Sirius had agreed to on the condition that Harry was present. Dumbledore had agreed. Whether he'd expected Harry to be the specific Harry that was available, rather than the managed, protected, carefully handled version Dumbledore had presumably been imagining when he thought about this child, was something Sirius was quietly looking forward to discovering. The custody question, the Chief Warlock said. The natural guardian, as formal godfather, would be Sirius Black, Padfoot said. Whose exoneration you have just recorded. The formal petition for custody is part of the submission. The ministry's position, a member to the left said, is that Mr. Black's recent circumstances, the period of imprisonment, should be taken into account in assessing his suitability as a guardian. The ministry's position, Sirius said, before Padfoot could respond, addressing the chamber directly, is welcome to be taken into account. I would ask the chamber to weigh it against the documented circumstances of the current placement, which include a cupboard under a staircase. A stir in the tiered seats. I would also ask the chamber, Sirius continued, with the specific calm of someone who has decided they are going to say the thing, to meet the child before making a determination about his best interests. The Chief Warlock looked at him. The witness is not yet scheduled, he's 5 years old and he's been sitting in an anteroom for an hour and a half, Sirius said. With respect, Chief Warlock, the child whose future you're deciding has been present in this building throughout these proceedings and has had no voice in them. That is consistent with exactly the pattern of decision-making that produced 61 runes in his magical core and 4 years in a cupboard. I'd like to suggest a different approach. The chamber was quiet. The Chief Warlock looked at Sirius for a long moment. Then he looked at the member who had raised the custody objection. Then he looked at Dumbledore, whose expression had shifted into something more attentive. Then he said, "Bring in the child." Harry walked in from the anteroom without being escorted. The child welfare officer was behind him, and she had clearly offered to accompany him because that was her job, and Harry had clearly declined with the same pleasant immovability he brought to all decisions he'd made and wasn't revisiting. He came through the chamber door and walked to the center of the floor and stood there, and the Wizengamot looked down at him from their tiered seats, and Harry looked back. He looked precisely like himself. He was clean, Remus had ensured that, good clothes now, shoes that fit, hair that was still doing its own thing but had been given every opportunity to do otherwise. He was small for 5, the malnourishment still visible in the fine structure of his face. He had James's jaw and Lily's eyes and a quality of stillness that was his own, and he stood in the center of the most powerful legislative chamber in the British wizarding world and looked at the people in it without being small about it. "Find me in the room." Sirius met his eyes across the floor. Harry found him. Something settled minutely in his posture, not relaxation, just orientation. Then he turned his attention back to the chamber. "Harry," the Chief Warlock said, with the gentle but formal tone that adults use with children when they're aware of the child and also have an institution to maintain. "Do you understand where you are?" "The Wizengamot chamber," Harry said. "The main legislative and judicial body of magical Britain. You're here to decide what happens to me." A pause in the tier seats. Yes, the Chief Warlock said, recalibrating. "Do you have anything you'd like to say to the chamber?" Harry looked at the Chief Warlock. "Do you want me to answer questions or speak freely?" he said. "They're different things and I don't want to do the wrong one." "Speak freely," the Chief Warlock said, after a brief pause in which he appeared to decide this child required a different register of engagement than he'd prepared for. Harry was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I know what was done to me. I know about the runes and what they were for and who placed them. I know about the cupboard and what was decided about where I would live and who decided it." He paused. "I'm not angry about most of it the way you might expect me to be. The people who placed the monitoring runes," his eyes moved to Dumbledore briefly, specifically, and then away, "I think they thought they were doing something protective. They were wrong about the method, but the intent wasn't cruel." Nobody in the chamber moved. "The people who placed the second set," Harry said, "I understand that was something different. I understand that was surveillance for power, not protection. And I understand that the two sets being confused for each other for years was part of what kept anyone from asking the right questions about where I was living." He paused. "I want to live with Sirius. That's my choice. Not because I don't have other options. I assume there are other options. There are probably many adults who would take me for reasons that have to do with what I represent rather than who I am, but because Sirius came to find me and told me the truth about everything and treated my understanding of my own life as something that was worth consulting. That has not been the general approach." The silence in the chamber had a different quality now. It was the silence of a room that has been said something it wasn't entirely prepared for and is deciding how to receive it. Fudge broke it. "The child has clearly been," he began. "The child," Harry said, looking at him, "is in the room." Fudge stopped. "I'm not a matter to be discussed as if I'm not here," Harry said. It wasn't aggressive. It was the same flat clarity he brought to everything that was simply true. "I'm a person. I have opinions about what happens to me. I would like them to be considered." The chamber was very still. Dumbledore, in the witness section, made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh and wasn't quite a breath and was somewhere between the two, something that moved through his expression and left it different on the other side. The chief warlock cleared his throat. "The chamber will note," he said, with what appeared to be genuine care, "that Harry Potter has expressed a preference for the guardianship of Sirius Black." He looked at the member who had raised the objection earlier. "Does the ministry maintain its concern about Mr. Black's suitability?" The member looked at Harry. "At Sirius. At the 42 pages of runic evidence in the record." "The ministry," he said, with the tone of a man adjusting his position to accommodate a new reality, "defers to the chamber's assessment." The custody order was issued 20 minutes later. Provisional, pending a 6-month review. Petrus had told Sirius to expect the provisional clause and to accept it, because it was the fastest route to the permanent order and the conditions of the provisional custody were entirely permissive. Sirius signed the documentation at the council table and the ink dried and the chief warlock's seal went on it and Harry Potter's guardianship changed hands in the same room where Sirius Black's exoneration had been signed 20 minutes earlier, and the whole thing happened on a Tuesday morning in November with the cold London light coming through the chamber's high windows. Harry appeared at his shoulder while he was signing. "Is that it?" Harry said quietly. "That's it," Sirius said. "We won," Harry said. "We won." Harry looked at the documentation for a moment. Then he looked at Fudge, who was speaking in a low voice to an aide and had adopted the expression of a man repositioning himself relative to a new set of facts. Harry watched him for a moment with the considering look that meant he was taking inventory. "He's going to be a problem," Harry said quietly, to Sirius only. "Probably," Sirius said. "Not today," Harry said. "No," Sirius agreed. "Not today." The meeting with Dumbledore happened in a side room off the main corridor, an hour after the session ended. Remus came, Sirius had insisted, and Dumbledore had not objected, and Harry was there because Harry was always going to be there for a meeting that was about him, and that was now the policy. Dumbledore looked at Harry for a long moment when they came in, looked at him the way he'd been looking at him since the chamber, with the particular attention of someone revising a long-held mental image against a new reality. "Harry," he said. "Professor Dumbledore," Harry said. He'd been told who Dumbledore was. He'd had the conversation with Sirius the previous week, the full version, the one that included what Dumbledore had done and why and what Sirius thought about it, and what Sirius intended to do about it, and what Harry should understand about the nature of the relationship going forward. Harry had listened to all of it and asked 3 questions, all of which were the right questions, and had arrived at his own assessment that was consistent with Sirius's but was his own. He was not warm. He was not cold. He was precise. "I owe you a significant apology," Dumbledore said. He said it directly, without preamble or architecture, which Sirius recognized as the specific form of Dumbledore's genuine apologies as distinct from his strategic ones. "What I did, the monitoring structure I placed, was a decision I made without your consent, and without respecting your autonomy as a person. The fact that my intentions were protective does not justify the method." "No," Harry said. "It doesn't." Dumbledore received this without deflection. "I also failed to ensure the conditions of your placement were appropriate," he said. "I monitored your magical core and did not apply the same attention to your physical circumstances. That was a profound error of priority, and its consequences are documented in this morning's proceedings." "The rune structure that was monitoring my magical core," Harry said, "also allowed someone else to access my data. Did you know that was possible when you designed it?" "No," Dumbledore said. "I did not know it was possible. I should have considered it. The construction methodology I used had a vulnerability I did not identify, and someone more clever than I gave him credit for exploited it." He paused. "Peter was always underestimated. By all of us. I include myself. Why did you do it quietly?" Sirius said. "When you realized the structure had been compromised. When you started suspecting Peter. Why didn't you bring it to the Ministry?" Dumbledore looked at him. "Because the Ministry had just imprisoned you without trial," he said, "and Bartemius Crouch was still running the DMLE with methods I found troubling, and I did not trust the institution with a case this sensitive." "So you managed it yourself," Sirius said. "And while you were managing it, I was in Azkaban and Harry was in a cupboard." "Yes," Dumbledore said. Simply. Without the elaborate contextualization that was his usual response to criticism. Just yes. The room held that for a moment. "I'm not going to fight with you," Sirius said. "Not today, and probably not in the future, because fighting with you is in no one's interest and I have better things to do. But I need you to understand something and I need you to understand it clearly." He leaned forward slightly. "Harry is mine. Not the Ministry's, not yours, not a resource in any strategy you're running. Mine. His life is his and his choices are his and his understanding of his own situation is going to be respected at every stage. If you need something from him, information, cooperation, access, you ask him, and he decides. Not me on his behalf and certainly not you without asking." Dumbledore looked at Harry. "Is that your preference?" he said. "Yes," Harry said. "Then that is how I will proceed," Dumbledore said. He paused. "I would like the opportunity, over time, to do better than I have done. I am aware that is something to be earned rather than granted." "Yes," Harry said again. He looked at Dumbledore with the clear-eyed assessment he gave everything. "There's a prophecy," he said. "About me." Dumbledore's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "What makes you say that?" "The shape of everything suggests it," Harry said, with an exact echo of Sirius's words from a week ago, which meant he'd filed that sentence and retrieved it at the appropriate moment, and Sirius felt the particular pleasure of a joke landing in the right place. "Is there one?" "Yes," Dumbledore said. "Tell me." Dumbledore looked at Sirius. Sirius looked back. "He asked," Sirius said. "He's asking you directly. That's the policy." Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment, and the quality of the quiet was that of a man engaged in a genuine reassessment, not of whether to tell Harry, but of the entire framework within which he'd been holding that information, the entire architecture of protection through concealment that had produced a child in a cupboard and 61 runes and a 4-year gap in Harry's life. "There is a prophecy," he said. Made before your birth. It speaks of a child born as the seventh month dies, with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord, marked as his equal. He paused. Voldemort chose to act on it. He chose you, specifically, from among the children who might have fit the description. And in doing so, he marked you, gave you powers he did not intend to give. Harry was quiet, processing. The power to vanquish him, Harry said. That's why he's been tracking my development. He wants to know when I'm strong enough. Or strong enough to be worth destroying before you become dangerous, Dumbledore said. He's afraid of me, Harry said. He is. Good, Harry said, in exactly the tone he'd used in the ruins at Carn Durge. Then I should become as frightening as possible as quickly as possible. Something that might have been amusement crossed Dumbledore's face. That is, he said carefully, a somewhat simplified version of the strategic picture. Tell me the unsimplified version, Harry said. I'm listening. Remus made a small sound. Sirius looked at the wall and did not let his expression do what it wanted to do. Dumbledore looked at Harry for a moment, and then he began to talk, and he spoke differently than he usually spoke, not the careful measured delivery of information rationed for effect, but plainly, the way you talk to someone who has established that they will notice the difference and call it when they see it. He talked about what was left of Voldemort, a spirit without body, requiring a host, sustained by whatever dark anchoring mechanism he'd arranged before his fall. He talked about what he knew of the timeline and the threat. He talked about Quirinus Quirrell, whom Remus had identified and who was now under Ministry observation thanks to Amelia Bones's efficiently moving office. He talked for 20 minutes and Harry listened to all of it and asked 4 questions that went to the 4 things that actually mattered, and Dumbledore answered all 4 of them, and the conversation that resulted was unlike any conversation Sirius had ever seen Dumbledore have, not because it was equal, exactly, but because it was honest in both directions. When it was finished, Harry said, "Thank you." Dumbledore looked at him. "You're welcome," he said. He sounded like he meant it. More than that, he sounded slightly surprised to mean it. They left the Ministry in the early afternoon, the 3 of them, into the same Westminster Street that Sirius had stood on 4 days ago after the first hearing, cold and ordinary and entirely uninvested in what had just happened. Harry walked between Sirius and Remus with his hands in the pockets of his coat, and the custody order was in Sirius's inner pocket against his chest, and the formal exoneration was in the leather folder under his arm, and London went about its business around them with magnificent indifference. "Where do we go now?" Harry said. "We find a house," Sirius said. "What kind?" "A good one," Sirius said. "With a garden. Big enough for Padfoot to run properly?" Harry said. "Big enough." "And a room for Remus," Harry said, not a question. Remus looked at the pavement. "I don't need." "Yes you do," Harry said, with the complete tranquility of someone stating a structural fact about the universe. "You're part of this. The room is yours." Remus was quiet for a moment. "All right," he said. "And a library," Harry said. "Remus needs a library or he gets restless." "I do not get restless," Remus said. "You made soup for 3 days," Harry said. "That was restless soup," Harry said. Sirius laughed. It was the full kind, the kind with lung capacity, and it echoed off the Westminster buildings and startled a pigeon and didn't stop for a while. Harry looked up at him with the expression he wore when he'd said something he knew had landed correctly, not performed, just satisfied, the specific satisfaction of someone who'd aimed at the right thing. They found the house 6 weeks later. It was in Wiltshire, 30 miles from Salisbury, on the edge of a village that had a post office and a pub and a population comfortable enough with the idea of a large black dog that Padfoot could run the fields behind the property without incident. The house itself was old, a farmhouse, stone, with a garden that had been somewhat neglected and therefore had the quality of land that had been allowed to do what it wanted and had interesting ideas about that. There was a library, a room that had been a library and then a study and then a lumber room and which, by a process of Remus spending 4 days working on it, became a library again. There was a room for Harry that looked over the garden. There was a room for Remus. There was a room for Sirius that he used primarily for sleeping and not much else because the rest of the house was better. The morning they moved in, Harry stood in the garden in the cold December light and looked at the fields beyond the fence and then up at the sky, which was the particular hard blue of winter that meant the cold was committed. "Can I practice outside?" he said. "That's the whole point of the garden," Sirius said. Harry held out his hand, palm up, and looked at it, and his magic moved, the particular quality of it that was his and nobody else's, enormous and clear and entirely unmonitored, responding to his attention with the focused warmth of something that had been waiting for exactly this kind of invitation. A light gathered above his palm, not quite flame, not quite static, something in the space between those things, and it sat there in the cold air of the December morning, warm and entirely his. No runes. No second recipient. No signal being read and forwarded to a ruined building in the Scottish Highlands and from there to something fragmented and waiting. Just Harry, and his magic, in a garden, on a cold morning in December. "Good," Harry said, quietly, to himself or to the magic or to nothing in particular, and let the light go. They settled into the house with the awkward velocity of three people building something new out of materials that had been through considerable difficulty. It was not immediately easy. Easy was not really the register any of them operated in, but it was good, in the specific way that things are good when they're honest about what they are. Sirius was loud in the mornings, which took adjustment. Remus was quiet in the evenings with a quality that meant he was inside his head rather than unavailable, a distinction Harry identified within the first week and filed appropriately. Harry was self-contained in a way that would have read as a problem in a different context but here read as the natural character of a person who had learned to be self-sufficient and was now learning, gradually, that he didn't always have to be. He left the light on in the hallway the first time Sirius went out for a full evening, which was not something he would have acknowledged as intentional if asked and which Sirius pretended not to notice with the same not noticing they'd both developed for things that were true and didn't need to be made uncomfortable by being pointed at. Remus taught him every morning. The curriculum had expanded since Alnwick, beyond foundation exercises and runic theory into proper magical history, herbology, the beginnings of potion theory, the kind of broad foundational education that prepared a child for formal magical study without constituting formal magical study itself. Harry absorbed it all with his characteristic completeness and brought questions to the evening meals that occasionally required Remus to go and check something, which he accepted with good humor. Sirius taught him the other things. How to move in the world, magical and muggle both. How to read a room. How to know which battles to have and how to have them. Quidditch, which Harry took to with a naturalness that wasn't surprising given the combination of genetics involved, and which Sirius taught on a low training broom in the back field on Saturday mornings while Remus watched from the fence with a cup of tea and the expression of a man who had seen exactly this scene before and was experiencing it as both memory and continuation. Peter Pettigrew was tried in January and convicted on 14 counts, which included 12 murders, treason, the unlawful placement of runic constructions in a miner's magical core, and fraud in the cause of a wrongful imprisonment. He received a life sentence, which was the maximum available, and was taken to Azkaban under guard on a Tuesday morning that Sirius was not present for because he had made a deliberate decision to be in Wiltshire instead, in the kitchen, making breakfast badly while Harry told him he was doing it wrong. Quirinus Quirrell was taken into ministry custody in February after Amelia Bones's team confirmed the presence of Voldemort's fragmented consciousness in a manner too specific to deny. The details were complicated and largely classified and Dumbledore communicated them through a letter to Sirius that was both detailed and candid, the most candid thing Sirius had received from Dumbledore, which set a bar that he intended to hold the man to. The situation was contained, for now, which was different from resolved, and Sirius understood the difference and made sure Harry understood it too. "Not gone," Harry said, when Sirius told him. "Not gone," Sirius confirmed. "Contained. The threat is real and it's going to come back in some form. The question is whether we're better prepared when it does." "Are we?" Harry said. "Yes," Sirius said. "By a significant margin." Harry considered this. "Because of the rune evidence and the Wisengamot," he said. Because we made the institution see. Partly, Sirius said. And partly because you spent 3 months learning what your magic actually is rather than apologizing for it. Harry looked at his hands. It was an evening in March now, and the garden outside the kitchen window was doing something with the longer light that made it look like everything had decided to try again, and Harry was 6 years old and growing, finally, properly, with the gradual velocity of a child getting enough food and enough sleep and enough room to stretch. I want to know more about the prophecy, Harry said. The full version. I know you do, Sirius said. When? When Dumbledore agrees it's appropriate. Harry's eyes moved to Sirius with the look that meant he was assessing whether this was a deflection. Sirius held his gaze. I told him the policy, Sirius said. He asks you directly. When he thinks the time is right he'll come to you, not me, and ask if you want to hear it. And then it's your call. Harry held his gaze for another moment. Then he nodded. Okay, he said. Okay, Sirius said. Dumbledore came in April. He arrived in the garden on a Wednesday afternoon without announcement, which was either a test or a courtesy, and found Harry in the garden practicing a specific piece of the magical foundation work that Remus had given him involving sustained directional casting, which Harry had been pushing to its boundaries with the methodical persistence he brought to things that interested him. Sirius was on the garden bench with the newspaper. Remus was in the library. Dumbledore stood at the garden gate and looked at Harry practicing and said nothing for a moment. He's extraordinary, he said. He knows, Sirius said, not looking up from the paper. He doesn't need to be told about it. He needs to be stretched. I can see that, Dumbledore said. He came through the gate and sat in the other garden chair without being invited, which was also either a test or a courtesy, and Sirius let it stand. I came to speak to Harry, he said. About the prophecy. As we agreed. Harry had stopped practicing. He was standing in the middle of the garden looking at Dumbledore with the measuring expression he brought to things he'd been waiting for. I know, Harry said. I'm ready. You anticipated the visit, Dumbledore said. You said you'd come when the time was right, Harry said. The Quirrell situation is handled and it's been long enough for you to do the accounting of what I'm like and decide whether I could manage the information. The time being right had a predictable window. He paused. Also Sirius's newspapers have been transfigured to hide the dates for 3 days, which he does when he's expecting someone whose arrival he doesn't want me to be specifically timed onto. Sirius lowered the newspaper. Harry was looking at him with an expression of perfect serenity. You, Sirius said, are going to be extraordinary. You keep saying that, Harry said. I keep meaning it. Harry turned to Dumbledore. Tell me the prophecy, he said. The real version, not the careful version. And Dumbledore told him, sitting in a garden in Wiltshire in April with the long grass moving in the wind and Sirius on the bench and the distant sound of Remus moving in the library, Dumbledore told Harry Potter the full text of the prophecy in the real version, not the careful one. Harry listened to all of it. Then he sat down on the grass, cross-legged, and was quiet for a long time, and nobody hurried him. The power the Dark Lord knows not, Harry said eventually. He was thinking aloud rather than asking, working through it at whatever pace it required. That's what destroyed him. What my mother did. What she gave me. Love, Dumbledore said. Of a very specific, self-sacrificial kind. Woven into the protection that remained on you. It's still there, Harry said. Even without the runes. I can feel it sometimes. He paused. It's warm. Dumbledore looked at him for a moment. Something moved through his expression, old and complicated and real. Yes, he said quietly. I imagine it is. Harry looked at the garden, at the growing things, at the particular quality of April light that was also a kind of warmth. She chose it, he said. Even knowing what it would cost. Yes, Dumbledore said. Then I choose it too, Harry said. Not dramatically, not with the performance of a decision being made for an audience. The way he said everything he meant, flat, clear, certain. I choose to face what's coming. Not because of the prophecy. Because he killed them, and he's going to come back, and I'm going to be in the middle of it whether I choose it or not. He paused. So I choose it. And I choose to be as prepared as possible. And I choose the people I'm doing it with. He looked at Sirius. Sirius looked at his godson, 6 years old, sitting in the grass with the April sun on him, having just accepted a prophecy with less drama and more clarity than most adults brought to far smaller decisions. He thought about the cupboard under the stairs. The shoes that didn't fit. The anchor rune scratched with a stick in the garden of number 4. The 11 hours in the North Sea with one paw in front of the other. He thought about what a Dementor was and what it wanted and what Sirius Black had become, in the end, in the part of himself that the cold and the years and the forced forgetting had never quite reached, not broken, not afraid, not anything that the thing it was fighting wanted him to be. He thought about 61 runes, and what had been watching through them, and the silence after the last one was pulled. I choose the same, Sirius said. Remus appeared in the garden doorway of the house, book in hand, with the expression of a man who had been reading and had heard voices and had come to see. He looked at Harry in the grass and Dumbledore in the garden chair and Sirius on the bench, and read the scene with the speed of someone who had been reading scenes for 30 years. Tea, he said. I'll make tea. Remus, Harry said, not turning around. Yes. Not soup. Remus stood in the doorway for a moment. No, he said. Not soup. And went inside. Harry looked at Dumbledore. Will you stay, he said. For tea. And then we can talk about what comes next properly. With everyone present. Dumbledore looked at him. He looked at Sirius. He looked at the garden, the growing things, the house with the light in the windows and the sound of Remus moving in the kitchen. Yes, he said. I'll stay. The tea was, by Remus's standards, excellent. The conversation lasted 3 hours. Harry asked more questions than anyone else at the table, and the questions kept landing in the right places, and eventually Dumbledore began answering them at the level they deserved rather than the level he'd initially calibrated for, and the recalibration was visible and good. When Dumbledore left in the early evening he paused at the garden gate and looked back. Sirius, he said. Sirius looked at him. I was wrong, Dumbledore said. About a great many things. The method. The placement. The information management. The assumption that protection required control. He paused. I was not wrong about what was worth protecting. No, Sirius said. You weren't wrong about that. Dumbledore nodded. Then he turned and walked down the lane toward the village apparition point, his purple robes thoroughly impractical for the April mud, and did not look back again. Harry appeared at Sirius's shoulder. He watched Dumbledore go for a moment. He means it, Harry said. About being wrong. I know, Sirius said. Is that enough? Sirius thought about it honestly. For now, he said. It's a start. What matters more is what comes after. Harry nodded. He looked at the lane where Dumbledore had been and then looked up at the first stars appearing in the east, the sky going deep blue at the edges where the light was leaving it. His breath was visible in the cool evening air. Sirius, he said. Yeah. Thank you. A pause. For the North Sea. Sirius looked at his godson. He'd told Harry about the 11 hours in the water, not as a story about himself, but as the answer to a question Harry had asked one evening about what had made Sirius decide to come, the specific mechanism of the decision. He'd told it plainly, the Dementor storm and the vision and the wall, and Harry had listened to it with the same complete attention he gave everything. You would have done the same, Sirius said. I know, Harry said, with the serenity of a child who understood this as a simple fact about his own character and had no particular need to be modest about it. I just wanted to say it. They stood in the garden in the April evening until Remus called from the kitchen window that dinner was ready, and then they went inside, into the warmth and the light, into the house that was theirs. Harry Potter, age 6, with no runes in his core and the specific warmth of his mother's protection still present in his magic like a note held through everything else, went inside his home and sat down to dinner with the 2 people who had chosen him, and ate until he was full. No one was watching. No one was watching, and there was nothing to watch for, and the evening light on the Wiltshire fields was soft and general and fell on everything equally, without information, without purpose, without the specific urgent weight of something being tracked. Just light. Just a house. Just a child, eating dinner.